owner of the US Mega Farmest video is Puramont para Intratnamiento Wino Infringed Recos de Autoriales. Los Recos de la Novela y la Imagen son del autor original, no reclamamos propiedad. No te gusta esperar y quieres escuchar este fanfic completo ahora? Suscríbete a nuestro Patreon, donde encontrarás los mejores fanfics. Chapter 976. Poor Loser. Rich second generation. Kinzu originally thought that he would have to wait until the next day to get the news, but he knew that someone would come to the door as soon as they arrived at the hotel. Mr. Clean, I'm Van Aldridge, a senior consultant of Birmingham Information Consulting Company. Standing in front of Kinzu, a blond white man in a casual black suit stretched out his hands to him very politely. You can call me Van. Okay, Mr. Van. After a pause, Kinzu also smiled and stretched out his hands. It seems that you are well informed. Of course. With a very humble smile, Van sat down in the reception room at Kinzu's signal and took out a folder from his briefcase. Mr. Clean, some things are really surprising. I hope you won't be too angry after reading it. As he said, Van handed the thin folder to Kinzu with both hands. Angry? Not really. Smiling and shaking his head, Kinzu took the folder and casually flipped it open to read it. However, after he took the first look, the smile on his face froze. What? Mr. Van, are you sure you didn't make a mistake? Kinzu closed the folder with a snap, his face so gloomy that water could almost drip out. I'm sorry, Mr. Clean. Shrugging his shoulders, Van's mouth twitched a few times, and he said helplessly, I know that this result is very surprising, but the fact is that it is like this. Kinzu grinned and sneered, and said in a non-committal way. In other words, we were fooled by a guy who can't even afford to eat. Ahem, that can't be said, after all, this guy is indeed a member of the Bozeman Brotherhood. Fern touched his nose awkwardly. He really didn't know how to respond to Kinzu's obvious self-deprecating words, so he had to change the subject. Well, except that the car is borrowed, the clothes are rented, and the identity is fictitious, everything else should be true. Kinzu rolled his eyes and was speechless. He was a billionaire, but today he was actually frightened by a small thug who was penniless and even owed the bank thousands of dollars. What's wrong? Clean, is the guy very important? Seeing that there seemed to be some movement in the reception area, Zumengyo, who had never had any taboos, walked over directly. No, it's not. Kinzu waved his hand, not knowing how to explain to Zumengyo, and simply handed the folder over. Wait for me to take a breath, you will understand it yourself. After taking the folder, Zumengyo flicked it open and took a look, and was a little speechless. Well, isn't this good? After a moment of silence, Zumengyo seemed to have thought of something, and a bright smile appeared on her face again. In this case, at least we don't have to worry about anything. What did I worry about? Kinzu pouted his lips in disdain and said stubbornly. Even if he is a core member of the Brotherhood, so what? If we deal with him, he can't get away. Okay, I know you are powerful, okay? Looking at Kinzu with a helpless look, Zumengyo tapped his forehead helplessly. You are powerful, but you can't accompany Eva every day, so isn't this result good? That's true. Touching his chin, Kinzu leaned back, feeling the soft feeling brought by the leather sofa, and his thoughts drifted away temporarily. Ahem, Mr. Clean, Mrs. Clean. Just when Kinzu and the other two are lost in thought, thinking about how to deal with the two little bastards, Fern beside them suddenly coughed twice. There is another situation here, I think you should know about it. After noticing that the two had shifted their gazes, Fern explained with a wry smile. Kinzu, who was thinking about what Zumengyo had just said, asked subconsciously after hearing what Fern said. Oh? What's the matter? This, Fern pretended to be in deep thought, but one of his hands carefully made a few money-counting movements. No problem, as long as the information is what I need, you can rest assured about the price. He waved his hand heroically. At this moment, Kinzu was really a cold. It's just a pity. At this moment, except for Zumengyo, no one else came to appreciate his domineering attitude. And what about Zumengyo? Listening to Kinzu's words, she showed a blaming expression on her face. It seemed to say, why are you so stupid? How much do you give to others? What if they ask for a high price? Fortunately, Fern was still very disciplined. He didn't ask for a high price as Zumengyo thought, but reported a relatively fair number. Okay, no problem. Sitting up straight, Kinzu came back to his senses and stared at Fern sitting opposite him without blinking. Tell me everything you know. I want to see if they're worth the price. Don't worry, Mr. Clean. They are definitely worth the money. Fern, who successfully achieved his goal, had a relaxed smile on his face and handed over another folder in his hand. I hope so. Shrugging his shoulders, Kinzu reached out to take the folder and started to read it with Zumengyo, who was sitting next to him. Who is this guy? After just one look, Kinzu moved his eyes away from the information and stared at Fern opposite him, as if he wanted to confirm the authenticity of the information. Mr. Clean, there is absolutely no problem with the information. Fern raised his hands and emphasized the authenticity of the information again, then explained. After reading this guy's information, we were also surprised, so we checked whose car he borrowed. Unexpectedly, we found out that it was a big shot. Yes, it's really a big shot. After closing the folder, Zumengyo frowned. Although she didn't understand the American political system very well, the son of a state congressman was indeed not a small matter. Just like the Powell family that was being suppressed crazily, although they may not have much themselves, their connections are enough to give many people a headache. Touching his chin, Kinzu, who was lying on the sofa, was very curious and said, by the way, how could such a noble son of the upper class lend a car to someone like Charlie Chris? After being asked by Kinzu, not only Zumengyo fell into deep thought, but even Fern on the side fell silent. Although this problem did not involve him, he believed that this day was not far away. Chapter 977 The Frightened Rich Second Generation. Sometimes, things that seem simple are actually very troublesome to handle. But correspondingly, sometimes, things that seem troublesome are actually very simple to handle. Just when Kinzu was wondering what the relationship was between the son of this state senator and Charlie Cress, this guy came to visit with a lot of gifts. Ahem, Mr. Clean, please forgive me for coming here in a presumptuous way. Looking at the white young man in front of him who was wearing a suit and tie, and looked meticulous, but spoke a poor Chinese language, Kinzu was really stunned for a while. It's okay, it's okay. Waving his hand, Kinzu motioned the white young man to sit on the sofa opposite, and then asked with some doubt. You said you're the son of Senator Ulysses Mark? Yes, Ulysses is my father, I'm little Ulysses. The white young man nodded repeatedly after hearing this, and also made a brief self-introduction. But, for some reason, Kinzu always felt that the way this guy looked at him was a little wrong. Well, with a hint of fear. What are you doing? Kinzu pointed at the pile of gifts in the corner and looked at him in confusion. Ahem, that. After a long pause, little Ulysses mustered up his courage, stood up and bowed deeply. Mr. Clean, I just got the news that Charlie Chris hit Mr. Clean with my car. I came here to apologize. Apologize? Looking at the white young man opposite in astonishment, Kinzu thought there must be something wrong with his ears. When did these rich second generations become so easy to talk to? They even came to apologize? His first reaction was that this guy didn't take his medicine today. The second reaction was that it was a fraud. But what Kinzu didn't know was that little Ulysses was also very upset at the moment. He was the eldest son of the Mark family and the head of the fraternity at the Bozeman campus of the State University of Technology. When did he ever be so humble? Especially with a yellow man. What's more, this yellow man had just dealt with one of his brothers this morning. But there was nothing he could do. His father's roar was still ringing in his ears, and his mother's crying scene was even more vivid in front of him. After learning that he had offended this yellow man, he received more than 30 calls in less than an hour. Without exception, all of them asked him to find a way to reconcile with him. All of this made little Ulysses, who was originally angry and wanted to come here to cause trouble, directly send away all his followers and come here alone in dejection. Yes, Mr. Clean. Nodding sincerely, little Ulysses suppressed the fear of the man in front of him, swallowed his saliva, and said with some stammering, I'm really sorry for what happened today. I just got the news. I didn't expect Charlie Chris to be so crazy. No, so you were talking about this matter. Kinzu was a little confused by the sudden news, and his reaction was a little slow. It was not until this time that he dared to confirm that he was talking about the incident in the morning. Yes, Mr. Clean, I'm really sorry. Nodding, little Ulysses, who had just sat down, stood up again and bowed to Kinzu. No, it's okay. Waving his hand, Kinzu also stood up and smiled and motioned little Ulysses to sit down and talk. There is no way, as the saying goes, you can't hit a smiling person. Since the other person has done this, whether it is true or false, Kinzu can't continue to pursue it. That's good, that's good. Hearing Kinzu say that everything was fine, little Ulysses couldn't help but let out a long sigh of relief, and collapsed on the soft leather sofa in the hotel. Kinzu was a little speechless watching from the side. When did I become so scary? Until little Ulysses left the hotel room with many thanks, Kinzu couldn't figure out why he was afraid of him. Wife, have I become so scary now? Coming to Zumengyo, Kinzu bared his teeth and made a very fierce expression. TSK, you? Zumengyo pouted without raising her head and pointed at the computer beside her. It's not you who's scary, it's your princes. What? Kinzu looked at the computer next to him with some doubts, and his expression froze immediately. Dozens of people died overnight, suspected to be gang vendettas. A Massachusetts senator died on the street, and the FBI was mobilized. Hundreds of restaurants across the United States have closed collectively, and the specific reasons are unknown. Billionaire mysteriously disappeared, and the Boston Police Department was surrounded by his family. Kinzu swallowed his saliva and looked at Zumengyo beside him with some uncertainty. If I'm not mistaken, they should have taken action. Nodding, Zumengyo sat on the sofa in Kinzu's astonished expression, picked up a cup of coffee and took a sip. But isn't this a bit too noisy? Scratching his head helplessly, Kinzu sat down on the sofa on the other side and said worriedly, if things get out of hand, it will be hard for the government to deal with it. Husband, don't worry. Seeing Kinzu's worried expression, Zumengyo put the coffee cup on the coffee table beside him and comforted him with a smile. Since they have already taken action, it means that they have considered all the consequences. If they can't even deal with this little scene, they are not worthy at being a politician. Well, okay. Shrugging his shoulders, Kinzu had to admit that he was indeed not as clear-sighted as Zumengyo. If they couldn't even handle this little thing, they were not worthy at being princes. Besides, even if they don't have the ability, the think tanks around them are not vegetarians. I said, I don't look scary, but this guy is so scared that his legs are shaking. Thinking back to the performance of little Ulysses just now, Kinzu couldn't help but curl up the corners of his mouth slightly. How can I not be afraid? Zumengyo stirred the coffee in the cup slowly, with a trace of melancholy on her face. A family, so many lives, are going to be buried for a prodigal son. It's really not worth it. Hearing this, Kinzu was silent for a long time, not knowing what to say. Yes, a family, so many people, just because of one decision, have to say goodbye to this colorful world. Is it really right for me to do this? Thank you Xiaoyo2 for your daily recommendation votes, monthly votes and rewards. Thank you all for your rewards and support. Liuyun is unworthy of it. The recent updates are really not good. After this busy period, I will double the updates. Chapter 978 Kinzu was tricked. Time is like a fleeting moment. You may not care about it, but it never stops. As expected, the news of the Powell family's disappearance completely disappeared from the world in just 2 days. No one mentioned this family in print magazines, online media, or even TV news programs. Yes, the news of the disappearance of a family that owns more than 100 restaurants and ranks among the top 10 in the American catering industry is like a small drop of water falling into the sea, without causing any ripples in this society. If there is any, it is that the entire American upper class suddenly began to spread the legend of a madman. The name of this madman is Kinzu. Fuck. What does this have to do with me? It's not me who did it. Lying on the balcony of a hotel in Bozeman, Kinzu held a wine glass in one hand and a phone in the other, with the 4 words "I'm not happy" written all over his face. It's no wonder that he is so depressed. It was obviously those princes who did it, but now the entire American upper class is putting the blame on Kinzu. There was no way, because he was famous for his revenge. Who could have offended him when the Powell family disappeared? No one needed to lead the way. Anyone who knew about this incident would think that Kinzu did it. Clean, isn't this a good thing? David on the other side of the phone seemed much calmer than Kinzu, the person involved. He sipped his red wine and joked, at least in this way, no one dares to provoke you again. Then I would rather others provoke me. Kinzu curled his lips, and the depressed look on his face did not decrease at all. Although what David said was right, after this incident, whether it was the 6 major financial groups or the 5 major mafia, they all severely warned their subordinates and descendants not to provoke this madman. But the problem is that he doesn't want to bear the reputation of a murderer. What's more, it's a crime that caused an entire family to disappear. Moreover, others don't dare to provoke him now, but once they provoke him, doesn't it mean that they're sure to completely solve him? Ha ha, clean, relax, aren't you fine? David, who didn't care about this at all, laughed happily on the other end of the phone. He thought that Kinzu's way of handling things this time was very good. Even if so many people know that I did it, so what? Do you have evidence? In this capitalist country, you may not be able to bring down a billionaire even if you have evidence, let alone you have no evidence. Well, it's true that he's fine now. Sighing, Kinzu leaned back helplessly, muttering with a depressed look. But there have been no less than 5 waves of people entering my manor to test it. Hearing this, David touched his nose, thought for a while, and shook his head helplessly. Clean, there is really no way to stop this. Unknown things attract people's attention, let alone this kind of thing. Then what can I do now? Spreading his hands, Kinzu drank the red wine in the glass in one gulp, and said with a wry smile, should I do nothing and let them wander around my manor? No, Clean, I think you should change your mindset. Shaking his head, David thought for a while and suggested, for example, let's sell this manor. Sell it? Kinzu was a little surprised. Yes. After nodding affirmatively, David explained with a smile. Look, aren't they interested in the manor? Then let them go and you can sell the manor directly to have some peace and quiet. Is that so? Kinzu nodded subconsciously. At this time, he also remembered Zumengyo's suggestion and his thoughts a few days ago. It seems that selling the ranch is a foregone conclusion. After hanging up the phone, Kinzu did not rush back to the house, but sat quietly on the balcony with his mobile phone in his hand, and he didn't know what he was thinking. Clean, what did David say? Zumengyo, who was waiting in the hotel room, saw that there was no sound on the balcony, and she couldn't help but walk over quickly. This matter has not only spread in the United States, but even Yu's father, mother and old man Yu, who are far away in China, have heard about it. So, after receiving a few calls, Zumengyo was a little overwhelmed. Fortunately, the speed of information dissemination in China is not very fast, and the level is not enough, so Kinzu's parents have not heard about it yet. What else can I say? That's it, I have to take the blame. Shrugging helplessly, Kinzu took Zumengyo into his arms and said with some depression, Wife, I always feel that those bastards have screwed me. Pulling the corner of her mouth, Zumengyo wanted to say, isn't this a very obvious thing? If those princes hadn't spread the news, how could so many people suddenly know it? However, thinking about the identities of those princes, she thought it would be better not to put so much pressure on Kinzu, so she simply changed the subject and asked, Hubby, what are you going to do now? What? Cold. Kinzu pouted unhappily, and suddenly a mysterious smile appeared on his face. Don't they want the manor? Don't they want me not to interfere in that matter? I will fulfill their wishes. Lifting her body, Zumengyo stared at Kinzu suspiciously for a long time, and then hesitantly said, Would you be so kind? Of course, I'm a good youth. Kinzu, who didn't want Zumengyo to get involved too much, faced her gaze that seemed to be able to look straight into his heart. He turned his head to the side with a guilty conscience. HMPH, just don't tell me. Zumengyo pouted her lips, although she was a little angry on the surface, but she breathed a sigh of relief in her heart. Because judging from Kinzu's current performance, this guy must be calculating others. It's not that I won't tell you, isn't it said that when you get old, you have a lot to say? After laughing, Kinzu stood up while holding Zumengyo, and walked towards the hotel bedroom, saying, Wife, let's discuss some meaningful topics, and talk about these troubles tomorrow. Hey, what are you doing? It's still broad daylight. Zumengyo, who was a little embarrassed, twisted left and right in Kinzu's arms, and said coquettishly, Explain the matter to me first, otherwise you are not allowed to touch me. Okay, I won't touch you. As he said that, Kinzu exerted force with both hands and put Zumengyo's whole body on a soft big bed. I won't touch you, I can touch you, okay? Chapter 979 On the plane. The morning sun was bright but not too hot, especially when it was accompanied by a spring breeze blowing gently on the body, giving people a feeling of comfort and ease. Boss, have you really decided? In a car driving fast on the interstate highway, Dale looked at Kinzu with a complicated expression. She couldn't understand why the ranch was suddenly sold. Of course, Dale was not reluctant to give up the ranch, but it was very sudden. Well, as for whether it was because of her father's worry, it was not something that outsiders could know. Yes, I have contacted those guys. Kinzu nodded gently, and a relieved smile appeared on his face. When you go back, ask them to pack up everything, and when I finalize this matter, you can move in. Well, I know. After nodding gently, indicating that she understood, Dale fell silent. As if she understood Dale's worries, Kinzu raised the corner of his mouth slightly, but said nothing, just turned his head outside and stared at the scenery along the way. This time when he went back to Boston to discuss the acquisition with the princes, he only brought Dale with him. The rest of them stayed in Bozeman, waiting for him to return. It was not that Kinzu was worried that the princes would play tricks, but mainly because the round trip was too long, and they could not stay for a few days, and the women were too lazy to go back and forth. So, the poor Kinzu had to come back alone. Well, although Dale might not be edible, what's the difference between bringing her and not bringing her? The car arrived at the airport quickly. After passing the fast lane with the black and gold cart, Kinzu and the other man sat on the next flight to take off. By the way, Dale. After sitting down, Kinzu seemed to have thought of something. He turned his head and looked at the beautiful female bodyguard beside him, and said with a smile, I haven't asked for your opinions yet. Are you willing to go with me to this shitty place in Montana? Hearing Kinzu calling her, Dale, who thought there was something important, couldn't help but roll her eyes. It's already this time, and you come to ask for our opinions? Is it useful? Ahem, well, I'm too busy to take care of it. Feeling the resentment in the female bodyguard's heart, Kinzu touched his nose awkwardly, smiled awkwardly and turned his eyes to the side. Humph. With a cold snort, Dale closed his eyes and lay back on the chair to rest, and replied coldly, As your hired bodyguards, as long as you are willing to pay the commission, we will of course follow you. Touching his nose awkwardly, Kinzu lay back speechlessly. Forget it, this girl is angry again. I'm the same, why am I so speechless now? Is it because of Zumengyo? Shaking his head, Kinzu put aside the messy thoughts in his mind, closed his eyes and began to take a nap. As for the angry female bodyguard next to him, now is not the time when he first came to the United States, he is the boss. As a boss, do you still worry about not finding a woman? The flight time is always very long. Although Kinzu forced himself to sleep again and again, when he woke up from the third sleep, the plane still failed to land. Looking at the time, it would take at least 2 more hours before the plane landed. Oh, this time is really hard to bear. After stretching and relieving some of the fatigue at the body, Kinzu, lying on the special leather recliner in the first-class cabin, turned his thoughts to Cheese with some boredom. Perhaps because of that opportunity, Cheese's body has now grown to 15 meters long. It is estimated that if it were not for the white tiger and the gorilla, who shared the fruits of victory with him, his body would have been close to 20 meters. 20 meters, what is the concept? If one floor is 3 meters high, Cheese's current body length is almost equivalent to that of a 7-story building. Hiss, sensing Kinzu's arrival, Cheese, who was almost in sync with Kinzu, roared excitedly twice. This roar was not a big deal, but it scared away the big bison that was about to step into his ambush circle. Hiss, after sensing what Cheese meant, Kinzu, who had not figured out what was going on, directly controlled his huge python body to run out. Just 3 seconds. It only took 3 seconds. The big bison that Cheese had targeted could not hold on for 3 seconds and was strangled to death by him. However, after Kinzu stopped, he felt a little confused. When did I become so good at playing with snakes? Even the movements were so smooth. However, the hunger in his stomach did not give Kinzu too much time to think. Especially when he looked at the big bison that was twisted into a ball of soft meat, Kinzu felt that his saliva was about to flow out. Brother, you eat slowly, I'm going to slip away first. After greeting Cheese in his heart, Kinzu directly shifted his thoughts back. Are you kidding? He is not a snake, and he can't eat like a snake. Not to mention the same, just watching the meat, Kinzu lost his appetite. You know what, I'm really hungry after being messed with by this guy. Kinzu retracted his vision, touched his empty stomach, and cursed Cheese in his heart. You can eat if you want, why do you have to eat when I come to you? Fortunately, Cheese didn't know Kinzu's thoughts at this time, otherwise he would have sprayed venom. In Cheese's words, that is, when the hell are you going to come to me, how would I know? Shaking his head, Kinzu pressed the service bell, and soon a stewardess in uniform came over. Hello, sir, how can I help you? The stewardess with a very sweet appearance and a hot body looked at Kinzu with a smile. Galong, looking at the beautiful stewardess in front of him who could score 85 points in appearance, the spring scenery leaked out because of a slight bend, Qinzu swallowed his saliva without grace. The beautiful stewardess who was so close to him could not fail to notice the obvious swallowing of saliva. She took a small step back, still smiling, but asked in a cold voice, "Hello, sir, is there anything I can help you with? Hello, can you give me a lunch?" Qinzu felt a little uncomfortable with the slightly contemptuous look of the beautiful stewardess. He straightened his body and his expression became serious. However, at this time, Qinzu wanted to pull out those guys who like to spread rumors all day and beat them up. Who said that Air China in the United States only uses middle-aged women as flight attendants? Who said that Air China in the United States has no beauties? You stand up here. Si est escuchando esta novela en un canal distinto a mundo fanfic novelas, significat lo descarga and y subir en sinisfuerzos invitamos cordialmente a visitar nuestro canal. Mundo fanfic novelas all encontras la versión original de esta historia y podrás explorar muchas otras novelas de diversos narradores. Te esperamos para sumergirte en un mundo de novelas incredibles. Chapter $981 billion. After reluctantly saying goodbye to the unknown stewardess, Qinzu turned around and took Dale with him, striding towards a large car parked on the airport apron. "Hey, Ruth, that guy's identity is not simple." The stewardess is standing at the cabin door behind him to see off the passengers became uneasy after noticing Qinzu's movements. Yeah, no wonder you kept pestering our Ruth just now. It turns out you are very confident in yourself. Isn't it? That car seems to be called Night the 15th, right? My boyfriend told me about it. This car is enough for us to fight for several lifetimes. Ah? So you have a boyfriend? Tell the truth. Hey, did I say anything? No, haha, don't scratch, I'll tell you. Listening to the laughter of her colleagues, Ruth, who had been standing at the door, showed a few traces of disdain on her face. He is just a second-generation upstart. The Manchi, Ruth, will not be this kind of person in the future. Boss Dale, who was following behind Qinzu, hesitated for a long time, and then reminded him tactfully, "There are already quite a few women around you." "Oh, really?" Hearing Dale's straightforward words, even though Qinzu was thick-skinned, he couldn't help but feel a little hot. "Yes." Nodding firmly, Dale began to count on her fingers. "Zhu, Eva, Mobeka, Onid, Christine, Xingxiu, wait. Hearing this, Qinzu hurriedly waved his hand to interrupt Dale's words. After wiping the cold sweat from his forehead, he said with some shame, "Dale, when we do things, we must pay attention to evidence, and we can't just talk nonsense. Empty words. Vernacular." Blinking her big eyes, Dale, who always thought she was an expert on China, pondered for a long time but still couldn't understand the meaning of these two sentences. "That's it, that's what." Qinzu opened his mouth and wanted to seriously explain the meaning of this sentence to the girl, but the mobile phone in his pocket didn't give him this opportunity. Hearing the familiar ringtone, Qinzu shrugged helplessly at Dale, then walked aside and answered the phone. "What? You are all here?" After answering the call, Qinzu listened to the voice of Prince Richard on the other side, and his expression suddenly became very strange. "Are these guys so anxious?" "Hey, Clean, you don't understand." After chuckling twice, Richard sat in a villa in the suburbs of Revere, with an indescribable expectation on his face. "You can't understand that kind of mood. Do you know how long we have been looking forward to it? The hopes of generations will soon be realized in my hands." "Ah, so that's it." Pinching his nose, Qinzu felt a little embarrassed when he listened to Richard's excited voice. "The hope of several generations of you is probably impossible to be realized by you." "Ha, Clean, I told you that you don't understand." Richard, who didn't notice the strangeness in Qinzu's voice at all, laughed a few times and urged, "Hurry up, I'm waiting to open a bottle of champagne to celebrate after signing the contract." Okay, we're already in Boston." After opening the car door and sitting in the co-pilot, Qinzu stretched comfortably and said with a smile, "It will only take a few dozen minutes at most. Let's talk about it when we meet." "Okay, let's talk about it when we meet. When you arrive, call me and we will find you." Nodding, Richard hung up the phone directly after he finished speaking, as if he was afraid that Qinzu would go back on his word. This guy, shaking his head, Qinzu lay on the soft leather sofa of Night the 15th, muttering helplessly, "I hope you guys don't cry when the time comes." "What? Clean, it's impossible, this is absolutely impossible." When it was past 3 o'clock in the afternoon in the United States, Qinzu finally sat in the ranch villa with several princes. However, at this time, Richard waved a document with trembling hands, and his whole expression was completely different from the high-spirited feeling when he was on the phone. Why is it impossible? I think this price is very suitable. Shrugging his shoulders, facing several princes, Yun did not feel nervous or stage fright at all. Especially now that he was holding a knife, ready to dig a piece of them fiercely. No, Clean, you can't do this. Waving his hand, Richard put the document in his hand aside, and said very sincerely, "We're friends, aren't we?" "Of course." Nodding without hesitation, Qin Zhu said with a bright smile on his face, "We have an old saying in China, called brothers have to settle accounts clearly, so, you understand?" "Understand?" Richard really wanted to swear to express his dissatisfaction. This guy actually asked for $1 billion for this ranch, which could only be bought for $100 million at most. Yes, 1 billion, and it was in US dollars. Although anyone with a discerning eye could tell at a glance that this price was definitely fictitious, and a lot of it was fictitious. But so what? Qin Zhu's purpose of coming back this time was very clear, that is, he was going to rip off these princes. Who made these suckers come to the door so easily? Well, Clean, you know that 1 billion is simply impossible. Richard, who was rejected again, shrugged his shoulders and asked bluntly, "Oh, what do you want to get? Do you want to join in?" "No, let's talk about the price." After waving his hand, Qin Zhu also sat up straight, looked at the guys on the other side, and said with a smile, "Since 1 billion is too high for you, I'll take a step back. How about 900 million? Thank you friends for your support, thank you." Chapter 981 Bargaining. Fuck. Clean, this is absolutely impossible. Prince Richard, who was a little mad, rarely cursed. 900 million? And US dollars? Why don't you just rob it? He wanted to take out his gun and shoot the Asian guy who was asking for a sky-high price. But thinking of his purpose, Richard had to suppress his anger. Clean, you should know that the market price of your ranch is at most more than 100 million US dollars. Richard, who had restrained his anger, sat down slowly, leaned on the soft leather sofa, and gently stretched out 3 fingers. "In this way, I will double the market price for you, 300 million US dollars, how about it?" No, even you did not hesitate. After listening to Prince Richard's words, Qin Zhu waved his hand and refused. "Your Highness, you have to understand that now you want to buy my ranch." Pointing at Richard, Qin Zhu pointed at himself and shrugged helplessly. "If I sell the ranch to you, I will not only have to move, but I will also not be able to take away some important things on the ranch. You can't ignore these losses, right?" You hearing Qin Zhu's words, Richard felt disgusted. "It seems that your kid has grasped the point that I must buy your ranch, right?" But Richard had to admit that this time he really made a mistake. After receiving the news, he was too active and actually took the initiative to deliver it to the door the next day. It would be strange if people didn't slaughter such a fat sheep. Clean, 350 million, no more. Gritting his teeth and looking at Qin Zhu, Richard said with a depressed face, 50 million US dollars, not to mention your other losses, it should be enough to buy a new set of things on the ranch, right? Oh, no. Qin Zhu stood up exaggeratedly, came to Richard, and said excitedly, 50 million? Your Highness, are you kidding? I'll give you 100 million, you go and buy me a new set, how about it? A little confused by Qin Zhu's sudden outburst, Richard was stunned for a long time before he came back to his senses. Don't get excited, Clean, let's talk it out nicely. After wiping the spit from his forehead, Richard stood up awkwardly, comforted the agitated Qin Zhu, and looked at his brothers. Could it be that the price he offered was really too low? However, when had the princes ever encountered such a thing? How could they know whether the price was high or low? Even the price of the ranch was something they had specially consulted with the nearby farmers, and only then did they infer it. Judd, who was sitting on the sofa on the other side, hesitated for a moment, and still stood up to smooth things over. Richard, Qin is right, your price is indeed not that high, how about this, let's each take a step back, how about 400 million US dollars? Before Qin Zhu could speak, Prince Richard, who heard what Judd said, quietly gave him a thumbs up, and then said, yes, Qin, 400 million US dollars, what do you think? Not so good. Qin Zhu gave the 2 guys a blank look, broke free from Richard's support, and sat down on the sofa. Since I'm asking such a high price, I have my reasons. You are not the kind of people who are short of money. Why would you bother about 100 million or 200 million? 100 million or 200 million? Bother. Kinzu's words made the two guys who were performing a double act dumbfounded. Damn, are you the local tyrant, or are we the local tyrants? 100 million or 200 million is still a small amount of money. Then what is not a small amount of money? What? Is there a problem? Sitting cross-legged on the sofa, Kinzu looked at the two silent guys, stretched out his fingers and began to count. Your Highness Richard, as a prince, and an independent prince, you should have a lot of small money on you, right? And Judd, you are the son-in-law of the number one in the White House, do you still care about this little money? Oh my God, Clean, you don't think our daily life is so easy, do you? With a long sigh, Richard also imitated Kinzu and sat down on the soft leather sofa. Clean, you have to know that we are not the eldest son. Although we don't have to worry about food and drink, except for some startup funds given by our family, we don't get any assets from the royal family. Is that so? Yun opened his mouth and wanted to refute the guy, but for a moment, he couldn't find strong evidence to refute what he said. Clean, His Royal Highness Richard is right. The affairs of a big family are very complicated. Except for the real heir, no one else is qualified to inherit the family business. Judd, who seemed to think of his status as a son-in-law, began to complain at this time. Okay. In this case, let's each take a step back. Kinzu waved his hand helplessly, sighed, and under the gaze of the onlookers, he stretched out his right hand and made a gesture. 500 million? No problem, deal. Richard saw this and made a decision impatiently. How is it possible? Kinzu rolled his eyes and complained weakly. Dear, this is it, 800 million. 800 million? The smile on his face froze, and Richard's turning movement stopped in mid-air. Your Highness, I really didn't ask you for more money. Rubbing his head helplessly, Yun said very entangledly. This ranch is different from others. You know, this is a renovated ranch. What? In a flash, before Kinzu could react, Richard had already appeared in front of him. Renovated? Who renovated it, you? This, you should guess. Shrugging his shoulders, Kinzu was also helpless. He was not going to say it so quickly. But the reality is cruel. If you don't make things clear, no one will accept such a high offer. It's really you. Looking at Kinzu in disbelief, Richard's heart at this time was extremely uneasy. Why? You have a family background, money, and looks. Why can't I compare to this Asian guy in front of me? But why is it that he always finds out good things first? Don't worry, Richard, I didn't touch your things. Kinzu shrugged as if he had guessed Richard's thoughts, and said mysteriously, I used the secret of our Chinese people. Really? Richard looked at Kinzu suspiciously, and now he didn't know whether he should believe this guy. Of course it's real, more real than real gold. Patting his chest, Kinzu stood up and promised solemnly. Anyway, as long as the money is fooled into handing over, as for the future, who cares? Chapter 982. Fooling old John. Okay, Clean, 800 million is 800 million, deal. When Prince Richard gritted his teeth and said this, he unexpectedly did not see a trace of happiness on Kinzu's face. Could it be that this guy really didn't fool him? Thinking of this, Richard felt a lot better inexplicably. Although 800 million US dollars is not a lot, it is not his alone, so he is not too distressed. The main reason why he was entangled for so long was that he didn't want to be a sucker. It's okay to spend money, but it's not fun to spend money in vain. However, Richard would never have thought that the reason why Kinzu didn't show a happy expression was not because he was unhappy. But he was inexplicably reluctant. Yes, reluctant. The moment Richard agreed, Kinzu's mood was inexplicably agitated. This is the beginning of his career and the place where he ushered in a turning point in his life. From the beginning of coming to the United States to meeting Evadel and Mobica, it was all here. Now, is it really going to be sold? But, looking at Richard in front of him with an excited face, Kinzu felt helpless again. It's a bit too late to regret now, isn't it? He dared to guarantee that if he said he didn't want to sell it now, Richard would shoot him with an Arkansas. Ha, Clean, you can't regret it. Seeing that Kinzu's face was not very good, Richard was afraid that this guy would regret it again, so he quickly winked at his brothers. Receiving Richard's signal, Ben Carter nodded slightly and stood up and came over. That's right, Clean, since you have already negotiated, let's trade. Okay. Kinzu, who was still a little sad, saw that the two guys were so eager to give him money, and his mood suddenly improved a lot. There is a saying that if the old doesn't go, the new won't come. Although he didn't have this ranch, he had money. $800 million US, no matter where he was, he would be a big local tycoon. Since both parties had no objections, it would be easy to deal with it later. Kinzu made a phone call and Jefferson rushed over with the drafted contract. "Boss, are you really going to sell the ranch?" After the two parties sat down, Jefferson looked at the prince's opposite and whispered in Kinzu's ear. "Yes, it's decided." Nodding, Kinzu gestured to the opposite side and said with a smile, "Let's deal with them first, and then talk about it later." "Okay." Jefferson agreed softly. Although he didn't say anything, his expression was a little disappointed. He was actually very reluctant to see Kinzu's sudden decision. As for why? It's very simple. The reason why David chose him to be Kinzu's lawyer is because he is a local and is more familiar with the human relations here. Once Kinzu sold the ranch and left here, it means that Jefferson will lose this job with a leading salary in the industry. However, although he felt very complicated, he had to continue to perform his duties as a lawyer and began to study the contract one by one with the other party's lawyer. Jefferson had no problem on his side, but the cowboys on the ranch were a little restless. No one knows who spread the news. When Kinzu and his friends were studying the contract in the villa, Old John had already come to the door with his men. Seeing Old John come in, Dale motioned them to sit down in the living room, and then hurried to the conference room. She knew that Kinzu would be busy again. Sure enough, when Kinzu heard Dale coming to Kinzu and whispering in his ear about Old John's arrival, his brows furrowed. "Sorry, excuse me for a moment. I have something to deal with here." After standing up and greeting Richard and the others, Kinzu gently patted Jefferson on the shoulder, nodded at him with a smile, and walked out of the conference room accompanied by Dale. I don't know why, feeling the strength on his shoulder and looking at the smile on Kinzu's face, Jefferson's mood suddenly became cheerful. Not only that, his originally serious expression also showed a hint of smile, and even his tone of voice became much more cheerful. It didn't matter that he smiled, but the lawyer sitting opposite him, who was brought from New York by Prince Richard, felt a little uneasy. "Is this guy setting a trap for me?" he muttered in his heart with some doubts, and the middle-aged white man quickly read the contract again. His action made Jefferson a little confused. He was afraid that something would go wrong and he would betray Kinzu's trust, so he quickly read the contract from beginning to end. Well, the matter that could have been done within half an hour was extended by Kinzu's action for another half an hour. Not to mention the two lawyers who were very thoughtful. Just say that after Kinzu arrived in the living room, he looked at Old John standing next to the sofa and suddenly felt a headache. This guy didn't even sit down. Is he waiting to fight with him? "Boss, you are not really going to sell the ranch, are you?" Seeing Kinzu coming out, Old John, who was standing near the sofa, rushed to him and grabbed his arm tightly, with a very nervous expression on his face. "Don't be impatient, Old John, sit down first." Kinzu easily pulled his arm back from Old John's big hand, and smiled and motioned the old man, who was less than 60 years old but looked almost 70, to sit on the sofa opposite. Although he was a little reluctant, seeing Kinzu's serious expression, Old John still sat down on the sofa opposite with some frustration, looking at Kinzu with a pleading face. "Boss, the ranch can't be sold. This is what Mr. Butt left for you." I know all this." Gently waving his hand, Kinzu stopped Old John from saying the next thing, and asked with a very ugly expression, "Do you know who they are?" Old John, who had a lot of things to say to Kinzu, was choked by this question. Who are they? How would he know? He just heard from Little John that his boss wanted to sell the ranch. He didn't believe it at first, but today he saw so many people coming to the ranch, bodyguards and luxury cars, and thought of what Little John said. Old John, who was a little excited, rushed over directly. But now that Kinzu asked him this, Old John was a little confused. "Yes, who are they?" "4 princes from Arabia and the son-in-law of the current president." Spreading his hands, Kinzu confidently stated the identities of several buyers. "What?" Old John, who had just sat down, stood up in an instant, and his face turned a little pale. "Yes, Old John, you heard it right." Kinzu sighed in a pretentious manner and said helplessly, "Do you think I cannot sell it?" Thanks to Layman for the 588 book coins reward. Chapter 983 Signing a contract. The bright sunshine spread over the pasture, bringing sufficient light to the green grass and making people feel happy. Of course, Old John, who was walking out of the luxurious villa in the pasture at the moment, was not among them. He had come here with a fierce momentum to ask Kinzu why he wanted to sell the pasture left to him by Mr. Butt so quickly. But what was the result? The result was nothing. Not only that, he even had to help Kinzu to appease other cowboys. After all, when the contract was signed, no one expected that they would be unemployed so soon. Of course, Kinzu's conditions were also very loose. If the cowboys wanted to continue to follow him, their wages would increase by 50% on the original basis. However, the work location was not certain, and they might have to follow him to Montana. And those who didn't want to follow him didn't matter. In addition to making up this month's salary, Kinzu would also pay another 3 months' salary as compensation. As for how many people would choose to go to Montana with him in the end, that was beyond his prediction. Anyway, he had done what he should do and had a clear conscience. Boss, this is the contract, there is no problem. In the villa, Jefferson took a contract that they had carefully checked, came to Kinzu and said with a smile, "That guy is really serious, he spent more than an hour looking at a contract. Ha, this is what a great lawyer is." Kinzu took the contract with a chuckle, glanced at it casually and put it aside, and asked, "How is it? I am still lacking a private lawyer. Would you consider going with me?" Of course, it would be an honor. It seemed that he had expected this moment a long time ago. Although Jefferson's expression was a little excited, he did not show any surprise. "In that case, then quit your job at the law firm and be my personal legal advisor from now on." After motioning Jefferson to sit down next to him, Kinzu put his hands together, pondered for a while, and continued, "As for your current job, just keep it as it is and continue to help Brother Chen open a new store." "No problem, boss, I will definitely assist Mr. Chen." Nodding, Jefferson promised very seriously, "That's good, I also believe in your professional level. Besides, can the person recommended by David be bad?" Standing up, Kinzu smiled and patted Jefferson on the shoulder, then picked up the contract next to him. "Let's go, it's time to sign." They must be waiting anxiously. Just as Kinzu expected, seeing that he hadn't come back for so long, the guys in the conference room were a little impatient. "Richard, you should contact the bodyguards outside and ask them to be alert." Half lying on the leather sofa, Ben Carter said anxiously, "What if this guy kills us all? He will be the only one who knows the secret." "TSK, do you think everyone is as stupid as you?" Although Richard was a little worried about his brother's words, he still hit him hard as usual. "What's wrong with me? If I were stupid, would I encounter such a good thing?" Although he felt that his worry was a little redundant, Ben Carter still retorted unconvincedly, Okay, you guys should be quiet for a while." Seeing that Richard wanted to continue to say something, Jard on the side quickly stood up and tried to smooth things over. He now realized that these brothers, including Richard, were not good seedlings for great things. Except for Richard, who was a little better and a little smart, his brothers would be destroyed sooner or later. Wait a little longer. If no one comes, let's go find them. After saying this, Jard looked at the lawyer next to him again and said with a smile, "Eek, don't forget to check the contract after you get it back. Although we don't want to take advantage, we can't suffer losses either." Of course, as the two were talking, the door suddenly knocked twice and was pushed open from the outside. Sorry, something happened to delay me." After smiling and greeting everyone in the room, Yun took Jefferson back into the meeting room. "It's okay. This little thing doesn't matter." Richard nodded with a smile, stood up and gestured, then sat back down and asked, "How about it, Clean? Can we sign the contract now?" "Of course, I'm not the kind of person who goes back on my word." "That's the best. Do I need to look at the contract again?" "No, I don't need to. I still trust you." Shrugging his shoulders, Kinzu came to his seat and sat down. He took the pen from Jefferson and signed his name on it with a few strokes. Clean, my best friend, you won't regret it." After receiving the signed contract, Richard could no longer hide his excitement on his face, and he almost shouted excitedly, "This guy, is it really necessary to be like this?" Touching his chin, Kinzu leaned back in his seat boredly, looking at the excited princes opposite him, and muttered in his heart with malice, "If these guys knew that the best things had already been taken away by me, would they risk their lives with me?" Thinking of this possibility in the future, when this great hope became a reality, Kinzu's head started to hurt again. Chapter 984 It feels so good. Here, according to the instructions on the navigation, we should go this way. "No, boss, we should go this way." At the fork of the endless interstate highway, a dispute about the road conditions suddenly sounded in a dark brown armored off-road vehicle. With a pair of big eyes, Dale turned his head and stared at Kinzu in the co-pilot, and said very seriously, Believe me, boss, I have walked this road when I was on a mission before. Okay. Listen to you, let's go this way. Facing Dale's slightly pure light blue eyes, as a man, especially a man who likes women, Kinzu could only raise his hands helplessly and surrender. Now it has been a week since the signing of the ranch transfer contract. Even the transfer fee of $800 million was called by Prince Richard at the first time. It's nothing, just afraid that this guy will regret it. Who made Kinzu act so reluctant on the day of signing the contract? However, Richard was really overthinking this time. Kinzu, who got $800 million, was so happy that he couldn't wait to regret it. Since the contract had been signed and the money had been received, Kinzu had no need to stay at the ranch. So, after leaving Erica to supervise the moving company's work at the ranch, Kinzu and Dale drove the night the 15th to Los Angeles. That's right, driving, and the destination was Los Angeles. The road distance from Boston to Los Angeles is a full 2,800 miles. If converted into kilometers, it is 4,500 kilometers. Even if the night the 15th is kept at a speed of 120 per hour, it will take about 38 hours to drive continuously. Moreover, if you drive, you can't drive all the time. With the rest time in the middle of the journey, it will take them about a week to reach Los Angeles. Dale didn't feel anything about Kinzu's idea. Anyway, she was used to this kind of long-distance travel. Zhu Mengyo, who received Kinzu's call, was very dissatisfied with this. In her opinion, Kinzu was just looking for trouble. Such a long distance, such a long time, and there were only 2 people on the road. If they encountered any danger, it would be a disaster. However, she couldn't refute what Kinzu had decided. Therefore, although Zhu Mengyo was a little dissatisfied, she didn't explicitly object, which made Kinzu feel relieved and bold to start implementing his plan. In fact, he had the idea of self-driving travel a long time ago. It's just that he never had the conditions. In the past, he didn't have money, and now he doesn't have time. Now it just happens that he has time and money, so what are he waiting for? Therefore, after transferring the ranch, Kinzu started his plan. Of course, although the ranch was transferred, it did not affect the supply of ingredients for the restaurant. Because at the beginning, Kinzu stated that after the ranch was transferred, the cattle, sheep, vegetables, etc. on it did not belong to Richard. In this regard, Richard said, whatever. As a prince, can he look down on those things? If it weren't for the fact that there were things he wanted here, he would not even bother to buy the ranch. Are you still counting on the prince to farm? Ahem, boss, it seems, Dale's somewhat embarrassed voice interrupted Kinzu's meditation after 2 dry coughs. What's wrong? Kinzu came back to his senses, looked at the scenery outside the window that had not changed, and asked in a strange way. The expression on his face was a little tangled. Dale hesitated for a long time, and finally gritted his teeth and said, we seem to have taken the wrong road. Rolling his eyes speechlessly, Kinzu pointed at the navigation and then at Dale. Covering his forehead, he didn't know what to say. After a long time, he asked weakly, can we turn around? It seems that I can't. Dale was also a little speechless when he heard this. Boss, are you crazy? You asked me to turn around on the highway. Then keep driving, and turn back when there is a road ahead. Shrugging his shoulders, Kinzu took the navigation helplessly and began to replan the route. In this regard, Dale could only pretend that she saw nothing and never said that the navigation was useless again. However, it was unknown what she was thinking in her heart. Just as Kinzu was fiddling with the navigation, the phone in his pocket suddenly rang. Hello, who is this? Kinzu asked casually without even looking at the phone as he reached out to pick it up. It's me, boss. Jefferson on the other end of the phone was stunned for a moment, then smiled and reported, I have already got some ideas about the new ranch. When you have time, I will send you the information. Time, looking at the navigation, and then turning his head to look at Dale who was driving seriously, Kinzu said helplessly, I'm not sure when I have time. I'll call you when I'm free. Okay. Touching his nose, Jefferson said thoughtfully, boss, that's it, I won't bother you to do your work. Hey, what do you mean? It's not what you think. Hey, Kinzu, who was holding the microphone, listened to the busy tone coming from his ear, and the depressed look on his face became more serious. What the hell is going on? Are these guys too open, or am I too conservative? Ahem, Kinzu would certainly not admit that he was too open. So when people heard that he was doing things, they immediately thought of other places. Boss, what's wrong? Is it important? Dale slowly released the accelerator and turned to look at Kinzu with concern. If it was really important, she wouldn't mind driving through the barrier. Anyway, Kinzu could afford the fine. As for detention, not happening. No, nothing. Listening to Dale's voice and looking at her body that looked more magnificent because of her leaning forward, Kinzu couldn't help but swallow his saliva when he recalled what Jefferson had misunderstood. If it was true, it wouldn't be bad. It's just a pity that this girl has a cold temper and is good at hands-on work. He can't beat her. Oh. Nodding, seeing that Kinzu didn't mean to speak, Dale sat up straight again and the speed of the car gradually increased. As the speed of the car continued to rise, the bright sunshine outside the car window and the breeze with a slight scent of grass kept knocking on the windows of night the 15th. Seeing this, Kinzu reached out and gently pressed the window, and it began to slowly drop. Ah, it's so comfortable. Chapter 985 seems lost. Even though the sunshine time in spring is long, the sun will eventually set. When Kinzu saw the light slowly blooming from the horizon, he knew one thing. The two of them would have to travel hungry tonight. Yes, hungry. The only food they brought with them had been eaten snacks by him in the afternoon when he was bored. It shouldn't be like this. There should be a town here. How come there is nothing here? Standing in the emergency lane, Kinzu held his mobile phone and looked at the town displayed on the navigation with a confused look on his face. He had estimated the time well and thought that they could rest in the town tonight and replenish some daily necessities, so he unscrupulously destroyed all the rations. But now, boss, how about I go get some game to take with me? Dale, holding a military dagger, got out of the car, looked at the endless wilderness on both sides of the interstate highway, and said expressionlessly, "The town is probably gone. If I don't get some game, I'll be hungry tonight, or even tomorrow. Ahem, how about I go?" Kinzu coughed twice, put away his phone, turned around and walked to the trunk, ready to take out his weapon. "No, boss, just wait here." After casually playing with the knife, Dale moved slightly, like a cheetah, and disappeared from Kinzu's sight in the blink of an eye. This girl, Kinzu shook his head with a wry smile and turned back to the car. Since Dale took action, there is no need to worry about being hungry at night. Ding-ling-ling, ding-ling-ling. As soon as the car doors closed, the phone rang. Kinzu took it out and looked at it, and a smile appeared on his face. "Hi, Christine, how was your trip in Hawaii?" Yes, the caller was Christine, who had not been in contact for a while. She took Shirley, who was almost recovered from her illness, to travel around most countries in the world in the past 2 months and visited many famous tourist attractions. However, every time she arrived at a place, she would first report to Kinzu that she was safe, and would also send him some small gifts from the local area. Of course, Shirley would also pester Kinzu to chat on the phone for a long time. For this reason, the beautiful Zhu was a little jealous. However, thinking of her own physical condition, she could only sigh helplessly and pretend that she had seen nothing. "Clean, I heard that you sold the ranch. What's going on?" Christine on the other end of the phone sounded a little anxious. "Hey, Gary, how did you know?" Kinzu did not answer Christine directly, but was very curious about how she knew this. "Don't worry about how I know, I just ask you if it's true." Being questioned by Kinzu, Christine seemed a little flustered. She didn't want to implicate her cousin, because she just got the news from her cousin, Douglas, when she called him. If Kinzu knew about it, he might think Douglas was a big talker. In fact, when Christine first got the news, her first reaction was to not believe it. Because as far as she knew, Kinzu had just inherited the ranch, and it was now developing at its peak. How could he sell it? What's more, Kinzu had not mentioned this matter during the recent phone calls. How could he suddenly sell it? Well, okay. Touching his nose depressedly, since Christine didn't want to say it, Kinzu didn't ask any more, but explained with a smile. "A few guys took a fancy to the ranch, and the price they offered was not bad, so I sold it." "Did they force you to do it?" Christine's voice trembled as she clutched the pillow in her arms tightly with both hands. When she learned the identities of the buyers from Douglas, she had already determined the matter in her heart. Kinzu must not want to sell it. After all, the ranch was inherited from his elders. How could he sell it just like that? It was only because of the prince status of those guys that he was forced to sell the ranch to them. Yes, it must be like this. So when Christine called Kinzu with this mentality, it was destined to have no results. Because no matter what Kinzu said, in her opinion, it was an excuse he made up just to stop her from worrying. The more she thought about it, the more uncomfortable Christine felt, and the more she wanted to cry. At the end of the conversation, her voice was choked. Okay, Gary, let's not talk about this. Scratching his head, Kinzu felt quite helpless now. How could this girl become stupid after going out? I clearly said that everything was fine, but she still acted as if she had suffered a great injustice. Clean, where are you? I'll go back tomorrow. Wiping the tears from the corners of her eyes, Christine said in a very firm tone. Kinzu looked at the deserted interstate highway around him and didn't know what to say. What's wrong? Don't you want to see me? Hearing Kinzu's silence, Christine's tears, which had finally stopped, began to flow again. No, why wouldn't I want to see you? After hesitating for a long time, Kinzu finally told the truth. The problem is, I don't know where I am now. What do you mean? Christine was startled by Kinzu's words and said subconsciously, were you kidnapped by them? Cough, cough, cough. Kinzu almost choked to death on his own saliva when he heard it. He coughed for a long time before he denied it with a smile. How is this possible? How could they kidnap me? Hey, this is also, Christine seemed to think that her idea was a little shocking. She muttered awkwardly. Then why do you say you don't know where you are? Because I'm lost. ... After a long silence, Christine swallowed with some difficulty and said in disbelief. Clean, what did you say just now? Cough, well, I'm really lost now. Scratching his head awkwardly, Kinzu quickly told Christine the whole story. This is the situation now. Our car is still parked on the side of the road, and Dale has gone to prepare food for dinner. Ha ha. After holding it in for a long time, Christine still couldn't hold back her laughter and laughed until she was out of breath. She really didn't expect that a female bodyguard who was a retired Special Forces soldier and a billionaire rancher could get lost on the interstate highway. Thank you for your continued support. Leon is ashamed, but I have been too busy recently. I really don't have the motivation to write for a subscription of a few dollars a day. However, this book will definitely not be abandoned or have a bad ending. Leon will work hard to update it. I hope that everyone can continue to support it. I also hope that friends who read pirated copies will come to Kidian and QQ Reading to support genuine reading. Chapter 986 Grant on Beep Beep. In the afterglow of the setting sun, on the wide and straight interstate highway, a dark brown steel monster was running at a speed beyond the limit. Hey, Dale, are you crazy? Tightening his seatbelt, Kinzu grabbed the handle above the car door with both hands. He did not look out the window, but stared at the dashboard in front of him, muttering nervously. You must be crazy, the speed limit here is 80, and you actually drove 120. What's the matter? Dale curled his lips in disdain. Not only did he not slow down the speed, but he was slowly increasing it. Oh, God, you must be crazy. You must be. Leaning back on the chair, Kinzu did not bother about the speed problem, and began to close his eyes and rest. He didn't know what the problem was. Anyway, this girl has been a little abnormal since she came back from hunting. First, she said that she didn't know how to deal with the prey, and threw 2 pheasants directly in front of Kinzu, asking him to deal with it himself. Kinzu was a little dumbfounded at the time. Please, big sister, even if you don't want to deal with it, you have to find a better excuse. We have known each other for a long time, who doesn't know each other? If it was just like this, it would be fine, but after Kinzu used the purified water he brought with him to clean the 2 pheasants, this girl began her crazy journey. At this speed of 120 yards, she has been running for more than 10 minutes. Thanks to the fact that this road seems to be a bit remote, there are not many cars passing along the way, so even if he exceeds the speed limit by so much, there is no problem at all. Hey, boss, what do you see over there? Just when Kinzu closed his eyes and was about to take a nap, he was awakened by Dale's voice with a hint of surprise. Where is it? What did you see again? Kinzu opened his eyes and yawned in a daze, and then looked in the direction of Dale's finger. Hey, what is that? He rubbed his eyes again with some uncertainty, until Kinzu looked outside for the second time, and then he believed his eyes. Hurry, drive to the town. Kinzu turned his head excitedly to look at Dale, and the smile on his face could not be stopped at this time. It seems that we don't have to sleep in the wilderness today. Compared with Kinzu's excitement, Dale was much calmer. At most, it's just sleeping in the wilderness. It's not like we haven't slept in the wilderness before, so what's there to be afraid of? Sometimes, the wilderness is much safer than the city. As the saying goes, a horse will die if it runs too fast. It seems that the distance to the town is not too far for Kinsey and his friends, but Dale ran at a speed of 120 yards for more than 20 minutes before arriving at the town. After finding a place to park the car, Dale looked around and said with a smile, "Boss, it seems that there is an event here today." "It seems that there is an event?" Pushing open the car door and getting out, Kinsey looked at the shops with unknown flags hanging on both sides of the street and nodded in agreement. "I just don't know what kind of activity can make the people in the town so active. It seems to be a basketball game." Looking at the familiar signs on the street, Dale's face flashed with a look of reminiscence. Basketball game? Kinsey smacked his lips and didn't ask Dale how she knew. Instead, he smiled and closed the car door. "Let's go, let's find a place to stay first. We can't really sleep on the streets at night, right?" "Boss," randomly glancing at the shops on both sides of the street, Dale shrugged helplessly. "Maybe we need to find someone to ask if there are any motels here." Not really?" Scratching his head, Kinsey turned around twice in confusion and carefully looked at the shops on both sides of the street. "This is normal." Compared to Kinsey's surprise, Dale was much calmer. She explained with a smile, "America is vast and sparsely populated. Some small towns even have only a dozen households. There won't be any strangers for months or years. Who do they open the hotel for? But that should be a remote area, right? This place is close to the interstate highway." "Yeah, but how many cars have we encountered along the way?" Touching his nose, Kinsey thought of the journey that seemed like a single-player game, and said helplessly, "Then let's hurry up. Even if we can't find a place to stay, we have to solve dinner first." "Don't worry, boss." Smiling and tossing the car keys in her hand, Dale said confidently, "Sleeping on the streets is impossible. At most, we can spend some US dollars. In the free America, there is nothing that Franklin can't handle." "Really?" Kinsey glanced at her with a smile and teased, "Then how many Franklins do we need to ask our beautiful Miss Dale to sleep with us?" Dale paused, turned around, looked at Kinsey with a smirk, and snorted coldly. "You don't need Franklin to ask me to sleep. As long as you can beat me into submission, you can do anything you want." "Is that so? Let's find a hotel first." Kinsey smiled awkwardly and pretended that nothing had happened, and took the lead to walk forward. "Boss, you're going in the wrong direction." After walking around the town twice, Kinsey had to admit that Dale's bad words were right. There were restaurants, bookstores, lottery shops, etc. But there was no hotel. "Hey, man, no need to look anymore." A white old man in a police uniform suddenly appeared beside Kinsey and the others, smiled and shook his head and said, "Granton is such a small place, it's not even full at home. Where can we find a hotel?" Looking at the man in front of him, whose weight far exceeded his height and who had a beer belly that seemed to be about to burst the police uniform, Kinsey smiled and tried to get close to him. "Mr. Policeman, do you know where there is a hotel nearby? Or where we can stay?" "I can answer this question, but," shrugging his shoulders, the fat policeman took out a small machine from his waist and said with a smile, "Before I answer your questions, and you cooperate with my work, please show us your identification." "Of course, that's no problem at all." Smiling, he took out his green card from his bag, handed it to the fat policeman with one hand, and then Kinsey asked curiously, "Mr. Policeman, did you say this is Granton?" "Of course." Raising his head vigilantly, the fat policeman put one hand on his waist and looked at Kinsey with a scrutinizing look. "Don't you know? Then what are you doing here?" "Mr. Police, don't get excited, we just got lost." Subconsciously raising his hands, Kinsey said with a bit of a smile, "You're really responsible. Do you check every stranger who comes to Granton?" "It's a must." After swiping Kinsey's green card on the small machine, the fat policeman's expression relaxed a lot, and he shrugged with a smile. "Anyway, the number of strangers who come to Granton every day will not exceed a single digit, so it's still easy to do this little thing. Now I finally know the reason for the recent sluggish update. I don't feel like typing recently, on the one hand because the income is not very high, and on the other hand because my arm hurts a little when typing. I went to the hospital for a checkup the day before yesterday, and it turned out to be tendonitis. I didn't make much money, but I got sick from exhaustion. Si est escuchando esta novela en un canal distinto al mundo fanfic novelas, significat lo descarga and y subir en cines fuerzos invitamos cordialmente a visitar nuestro canal. Mundo fanfic novelas all encontrar la versión original de esta historia y podrás explorar muchas otras novelas de diversos narradores. Te esperamos para sumergirte en un mundo de novelas incredibles. Chapter 987 Accommodation Issues. Hey, man, this way. After checking the identities of Kinzu and the other two, the old policeman led them to the door of a small restaurant and said with a smile, "The house of Kanays is big enough and there are empty rooms, so if there is a need, it can be used as a temporary hotel." "Oh, God, thank you so much." He grabbed the old policeman's hands. Kinzu shook them vigorously a few times and said excitedly, "This is simply the best news I have heard in the past few days, no doubt about it. I hope you can still say that later." Shrugging his shoulders, the old policeman looked at the puzzled eyes of Kinzu and the other two, and explained with a smile, "A temporary hotel, just by listening to the name, you can tell that the conditions are definitely not very good. It may feel very different from where you lived before." Hearing what the old policeman said, Kinzu and Dale looked at each other and couldn't help but hesitate. If the conditions are too bad, it's really better to stay in the car. After all, it's a leather sofa. How about it? Have you thought about it? Seeing the two people in hesitation, the old policeman smiled, but did not mind, but reminded them considerately. He said, "If you mind the accommodation environment, you can eat something here and then go back to the car to sleep." "Well, it's okay, let's go and have a look first." Touching his nose, although he was a little nervous, Kinzu didn't want to give up halfway. After all, sleeping in the car is not as comfortable as a soft big bed. "Okay, then you come with me." Shrugging his shoulders, the old policeman said nothing more, and took the two people into this restaurant with a little deserted business. Just like a hotel, restaurants in this small town are also that kind of dispensable things. There is only such a big place, so few people, and everyone has a family, who has nothing to do and always comes out to eat. So, when Kinzu saw the deserted environment of the restaurant in front of him, he was not surprised, but admired the boss here. Why? Because it is really not easy to persist in this situation. Especially, although this place is deserted, it is not the kind that is deserted. It seems that he is very familiar with the boss here. As soon as he entered the restaurant, the old policeman shouted at the top of his voice, "Kanishi, come out quickly, old Max is here to introduce you to business." Kinzu and the other person who followed in behind couldn't help but have a few black lines on their foreheads. "Dale, why do I feel like I have entered a den of thieves?" "Boss, don't be afraid, I will protect you, no one can hurt you." Listening to the two people whispering, Max, who was originally smug, froze his smile on his face in an instant. "God, how is it possible? How could I, Max, do such a thing?" Spreading his hands, the old policeman looked at Kinzu and said in an exaggerated tone, "Man, you hurt the fragile heart of an old man, tell me, what should I do?" "Fragile heart?" Kinzu opened his mouth and wanted to complain a few words, but looking at the few diners around, he couldn't help swallowing his words back. 88 Copyright AH6 K smiley face 4 at UI Degrees EZ/ Naught R at BMU asterisk at Y at quotation mark RNP underscore CIIOC4 EF question mark J. Ahem, Miss Kanays, we are not here for dinner. Waving his hand, Kinzu put aside the messy thoughts in his mind, and before Kanays, who looked puzzled, could ask, he immediately explained, "We are tourists passing through Granton. It's getting late, so we want to find a place to rest." "Oh, so that's it." Kanays nodded with relief, and smiled and made a gesture of invitation. "In that case, let's go up and take a look." After more than an hour of tossing, Kinzu and his partner finally stayed at Kanays' house. There was no way, although the facilities in the room were a little incomplete, the hygiene was up to standard. So, after going upstairs and looking around, Kinzu made up his mind, "Boss, do you want to go out for a walk?" Dale, who had tidied up her room, walked into Kinzu's room with a smile on her face, and said with a smile, "I heard from Miss Kanays that there will be a football game in the town center later." "Ball game? Football?" Kinzu looked up in surprise, with some expectation in his eyes. "Of course not, it's a basketball game." Shrugging, Dale explained with a smile, "It's just a friendly match between the two towns, but I heard it's still interesting." "Basketball game?" Kinzu lay down on the bed in a somewhat frustrated manner and said listlessly, "Go by yourself. I'm not interested." "Oh? Really? As if she had expected Kinzu's reaction, Dale raised the corner of her mouth slightly and said with a smile, "That's a pity. I heard there will be a bonfire party after the basketball game, and there will be performances at the party." "Oh? Is the nightlife so rich?" Standing up in surprise, Kinzu straightened his clothes and said calmly, "Let's go, let's eat first, and then go to the town together after dinner." "Okay, listen to you." Shrugging, Dale suppressed the smile that was about to burst out, and followed Kinzu out. "Hey, Clean, how is the room? Are you satisfied?" It seems that he is really familiar with the boss here. After Kinzu went downstairs, he actually saw the old policeman Max. However, Max had taken off his police uniform and was wearing a neat cowboy outfit. He was holding a lamb chop and waving at Kinzu while chewing it. "Hey, man, you should eat less meat." When he got closer, Kinzu looked at the table of meat, then looked at Max's fat body, and said with a smile, "If you continue like this, I'm really worried that some people will not be able to stand it." "Ahem, man, why don't I understand what you are saying?" Shrugging his shoulders, facing Kinzu's teasing, old Max looked calm. Obviously, this was not the first time. Or rather, Kinzu was not the first person to tease him. Chapter 988 Hunger Strike. In the early morning, the orange-red sunlight cut through the mist, dispelled the haze, and gradually enveloped the sky over the small town of Granton. However, the town seemed relatively quiet at the moment, without the hustle and bustle of the past. Except for a few fat aunts who got up early to pick up the garbage, they still insisted as usual, and everyone else was sleeping soundly in the warm quilt. They were too tired. After a wonderful basketball game yesterday, the town held another town-wide carnival. Barbecue, beer, music, and the show performances that made people applaud. The direct consequence of this is that none of the crazy and pretentious guys yesterday can get up now. Of course, some people are sleeping alone at home, while others are hugging each other, enjoying the rare world of two people. Just like Kinzu at this moment. After waking up from a sleep, he found that there was suddenly a soft body in his arms. Of course, this is not the most important thing. The most important thing is that both of them were naked. Perhaps because Kinzu's movements were a bit too big, the beauty in his arms opened her sleepy eyes, looked up and saw him, and subconsciously greeted him. "Hi, boss, good morning." "Morning, good morning." Kinzu swallowed hard and stared at the beauty in his arms without blinking. "I didn't expect it. I really didn't expect it. This girl is so big. Ah. Why are you here?" As if she suddenly reacted, Dale jumped up from the bed. Her disheveled hair looked particularly feminine. Kinzu could only describe it this way. "Well, Dale, listen to my explanation." Facing the murderous size of the personal female bodyguard, Kinzu shrugged innocently. "You drank too much yesterday, and then I drank too much, and finally we both drank too much." Listening to Kinzu's explanation, which was even more nonsense than nonsense, Dale couldn't help rolling her eyes. "Fuck, get out now." I don't think I can do it." Looking around the layout, Kinzu said helplessly under Dale's fierce gaze, "This seems to be my room." Dale opened her mouth, and now she didn't even have the heart to curse, and casually took her clothes from the bed. However, just as she was about to put them on, Dale was a little frustrated to find that none of her clothes were complete. "Oh, God." Rubbing her hair frantically, Dale simply wrapped the quilt around herself and ran out directly. This girl, touching his nose, Kinzu was a little helpless. What he said was obviously the truth. The basketball game last night was very exciting. Although the level was only average, they were evenly matched, and the game was extremely intense. They played fiercely on the court, and Dale, the cold-faced female bodyguard, was watching with relish below. Even Kinzu didn't understand it. How could Dale, who doesn't even pay much attention to the NBA, pay so much attention to a rural basketball game? But Dale's answer was very straightforward. These are all memories that come slowly. Although the professional league is of a high level, it is not something they can play. Well, Kinzu said that he could not understand the thoughts of these Europeans and Americans. Anyway, the final result is that Dale, who was so excited about watching, also drank a lot in the end. And what about Kinzu? Was he really drunk? I swear to God, he was really drunk. There was no way Dale, who was drunk, grabbed him and wouldn't let go. The two guys drank one glass after another, ignoring the people around them. Wine is really a good thing. Shaking his head, Kinzu sat up with his back against the headboard and lit a cigarette for himself. How many times has this happened after drinking? Once can be said to be an accident, twice can also be said to be an accident. How many times has this happened? Could it be that I am a philandering scumbag in my bones? No, I'm not a scumbag. The definition of a scumbag is a guy who flirts but does not take responsibility. And what about me? Although he was a big fickle, he took responsibility. Well, he was not a scumbag. After defining himself as a scumbag in his heart, Kinzu felt much more comfortable. Hey, what is that? His eyes accidentally swept across the bed, and Kinzu found a bright red mark on the sheets. Dale's? It can't be. Kinzu approached with doubt, staring at the bright red mark for a long time, but he couldn't be sure whether it was left by Dale. Logically speaking, female soldiers from the American Army, especially those from the Special Forces, can't be the first time, even if they are not ridden by thousands of people. Could it be that Dale's bosses are gay? In any case, seeing this red mark, Kinzu's mood suddenly became particularly bright. Whether it was intentional or not, he got it, didn't he? Ding-ling-ling, ding-ling-ling. The sudden ring of the phone startled Kinzu, who was in a state of pride, especially when he saw the call arrive clearly. He felt even more nervous. Ahem, dear, why are you here so early? I don't want to either. Zumengyo's voice on the other end of the phone sounded a little helpless. She looked up at the group of animals of all sizes gathered at the door and said frustratedly, Hubby, when can you come back? What's wrong? Kinzu sat up straight and asked nervously. Did anything happen at home? No big thing, but small things kept happening. Rubbing his head irritably, Zumengyo muttered. Especially those guys you raised, they don't know how to be quiet at all. Gay? After hearing that everything was fine at home, Kinzu breathed a long sigh of relief and asked with a smile. How did they provoke, my dear? Don't mention it, I'm so annoyed. Zumengyo pouted and reached out to lift the ears of Daha beside her. These guys are now collectively on a hunger strike with me, and none of them are eating. What the hell? Hunger strike? Kinzu opened his mouth in surprise, and he even wondered if there was something wrong with his ears. Just that group of big and small foodies, are they willing to go on a hunger strike? Yeah, they're on a hunger strike. Letting Daha go for the time being, Zumengyo reached out her little hand to Betty on the other side, tugged at its chubby little face, and said helplessly, It's been 2 days since we came from the ranch, and these guys won't eat anything. If this continues, you probably won't see them when you come back. Betty is on a hunger strike too? Kinzu was still a little suspicious. That's right. Looking at the pile of beef and fruit in front of Betty, Zumengyo said with a smile. Even this little foodie won't eat anything. Really? Recommend a popular book to a friend. My goddess master is fat and waiting to be slaughtered. Chapter 989. The journey ended early. If it was said that Kinzu was unable to realize his dream of self-driving travel in China because he had no money, then now, he was simply too tied up to not be able to enjoy a self-driving trip of his own. On the afternoon of the next day, when Dale drove the night the 15th and Kinzu to a small city near Granton, Erica had been waiting for a long time with several female bodyguards. Only after the car was checked in at the airport did Kinzu and the others board the helicopter that had been waiting for a long time. Hi, boss, did you have a good trip? After Kinzu sat down in his seat, Erica in the cockpit immediately turned around and greeted him. Shrugging, Kinzu's expression looked helpless. If you hadn't come so suddenly, I think it would have been a pleasant experience. Well, I'm really sorry. Shrugging, Erica didn't show any embarrassed expression on her face. Come to think of it, it wasn't her who disturbed the boss's trip. Why should she be embarrassed? Kinzu's current location is still a little far from Los Angeles. Even if it keeps flying, it will take several hours. If you drive alone, it is easy to get tired. Fortunately, there are enough people coming this time, and there are enough pilots to rotate. Finally, after the third refueling, the helicopter arrived in Los Angeles safely and landed slowly in the mansion in Beverly Hills. Husband, you finally came back. As soon as Kinzu stepped out of the plane, he was hugged by Zumengyo who was waiting below. However, before he could say anything, he heard Zumengyo said anxiously, Come on, my little Alaska is almost starving to death. Really? They are not close to you, why don't they eat when you are not around? Kinzu opened his mouth and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Wife, you have to wait for me to rest for a while, right? Oh, then you rest for a while. Letting go of Kinzu's big hand, before he could react, Zumengyo ran away with a smile. You take a rest first, I'll go and bring the little ones over. Are you in such a hurry again? Shaking his head helplessly, Kinzu turned around and looked at Eva beside him. How is it? Are you used to staying here? Of course, this is really a paradise. Shrugging her shoulders, Eva sighed. Not enough. If you live here every day, you'll be useless. Her. Why? Kinzu was a little stunned when he heard it. He really didn't react. Didn't he just say that this is a paradise? How come people are useless in the blink of an eye? Because you don't have to do anything yourself. While helping to unload things from the plane, Eva smiled and said, if you don't do it yourself for a long time, what else can you do? Okay, you in. Spreading his hands, Kinzu didn't dwell on this topic, but chatted with Eva as if nothing had happened. However, his eyes always glanced at Dale, who was tense on the side. It's strange to say, Dale, who has always been carefree, has a strange expression all day after last night. Although she usually treats people with a cold look, her current look is completely different from usual. Boss, what's wrong with my sister? While packing up her things, Eva secretly glanced at her sister. It is said that girls are more sensitive than men. Eva has long been suspicious of Dale's abnormal behavior. Especially this time, Dale's reaction is quite big. If Eva didn't notice it, it would be really strange. I don't know, is it a broken heart? Touching his nose, Kinzu shifted his gaze away with some embarrassment. There is no way, are you going to let her say that I did your sister yesterday, and it is completely normal for her to be like this now? What are you talking about? Eva rolled her eyes at Kinzu in dissatisfaction and said with a smile, my sister has never been in love, how can she be heartbroken? If she in love with you? It's not impossible. As long as she doesn't mind, I don't care. Hubby, come quickly. Just when Kinzu and the other two are chatting happily, Zumengyo's somewhat anxious voice, accompanied by the rapid barking and howling of dogs and wolves, came over. Woof woof woof, I'm come in, what's going on? Kinzu dropped the things in his hands and ran towards the place where the sound came from. However, before he ran a few steps, he was surrounded by the two guys, Daha and her, one in front and one behind. I don't know if it was because they were not used to the new place or what, the two guys who hadn't seen Kinzu for a few days hugged his thighs and howled. Okay, stop yelling. Reaching out and gently stroking the backs of the two guys, Kinzu felt a little warm in his heart. I didn't expect these two guys to be so attached to me. Before Kinzu finished warming up, Betty on the other side swung her fat little body and ran over to join in the fun. Hey, kid, you can't do this. Frightened by this guy, Kinzu quickly pushed her and her away and helped Betty up. Roar! Betty, who was rejected by Kinzu, looked at the smug Daha and her next to her, and immediately got angry and kept rolling on the ground and howling. Oh my god, you guy! Rubbing his aching head, Kinzu looked at the remaining little guys and felt for the first time that having too strong a presence was not a good thing. Get out of the way, get out of the way. Before Kinzu could appease the guys here, Zumengyo came over with a few little Alaskans. Look, your dad is here, hurry up and eat. Woo, it seemed that they were really too excited to see Kinzu. The Alaskans that had been drooping their heads suddenly became energetic, and it was not at all like they were in a bad mood before. This guy, are they all blind? Seeing this, Zumengyo on a side muttered with envy and jealousy. A few ungrateful wolves, I treated you with good food and drink, but you actually treated me like this. Or, as if understanding what Zumengyo said, one of the little guys who looked stronger came to Zumengyo's provincial sign and stretched out his pink tongue to lick her hand non-stop. Look, you said the little guy didn't get close to you. Kinzu smiled and pointed at the little Alaskan, and the expression on his face looked a little mysterious. Chapter 990. Disturbing the people, ha. In the early morning, the orange-red sun quietly peeked out from the clouds, secretly watching the most luxurious residential area in the world. Beverly Hills cry. The sudden cries of eagles broke the tranquility of the morning and woke people who were immersed in their dreams. Damn, haven't you found out who raised this guy yet? As one of the best residential areas in the United States and even the world, Beverly Hills attracts top wealthy people from all over the world to settle down and vacation here. Among these top wealthy people, except for those workaholics, most of them sleep until they wake up naturally. Therefore, after being disturbed from their dreams several times, some people can't sit still. Boss, I found it. Hearing his boss's curse, the servant who was serving on the side hurriedly reported. These two harpy eagles were raised by Tycoon, who moved in not long ago. Is it him? The middle-aged white man who sat up from the bed couldn't help but frown slightly when he heard it. He originally thought that this was a wild bird that flew in from somewhere, and was going to ask the housekeeper to shoot it. Even if it was a protected animal, who knew that he did it? What he didn't expect was that it was actually someone else's pet. As a neighbor not very far away, he certainly had some understanding of the newly moved and waxy Tycoon. Although he had been mentally prepared before inquiring about the news, after all, those who could afford to live in Beverly Hills must be rich or noble. However, although he had expected it, the feedback he received still surprised him a little. He inherited a fortune of more than $1 billion for no reason, the gang members who were his enemies were either dead or missing, and a big family disappeared completely because of a verbal dispute. The most important thing is that this guy has a close relationship with several princes. He is simply a super thorn. The middle-aged white man rubbed his head irritably and lay down again. Forget it, anyway, it's not just me who can't stand it. There must be a fool who offends him. He guessed correctly. Of course, it is impossible that only a few of them live in Beverly Hills. Moreover, not everyone can find out Kinzu's background. So, when Kinzu just climbed up from the soft body beside him, he heard a knock on the door outside. Who is it? So early in the morning. Kinzu stretched and muttered a little depressed. No matter who is doing a long-distance exercise, they will not want to move. Who do you care who she is? She must have something to ask you, get up quickly. Zumengyo, who was weak, rolled her eyes at this guy unhappily. She was woken up from her sleep so early in the morning, and now her body is still a little sore. Okay, I'll take a look. Shrugging helplessly, Kinzu got up and covered Zumengyo with the quilt, and walked out casually with a bath towel. Eva? Is there something wrong so early? The moment he stretched out his hand to open the door, Kinzu couldn't help but shout out in surprise. He didn't expect that it would be Eva outside. Not for anything else, just because this girl never came to disturb him when he and Zumengyo were sleeping. That was not a very pleasant thing for her. Boss, there are 2 policemen outside to visit. Shrugging, Eva looked helpless. I don't want to disturb your rest, but they are indeed a little anxious, and the matter is related to Haha and Pape. Haha and Pape? What's wrong with them? Kinzu, who was a little uncomfortable when he heard that the police came to visit, frowned now. I'm not too sure, you'll know when you go downstairs. With that, Eva turned and walked downstairs. This girl, touching his nose, Kinzu didn't say anything. After returning to the bedroom and greeting Zumengyo, he ran to the bathroom to wash up. When he was ready and changed into a brand new light blue suit and walked down, 2 white policemen in uniform, one fact and one thing, were already waiting anxiously. Oh, God, Mr. Clean, you finally came out. Shrugging, the fat policeman stood up from the sofa and stretched out his big fat hand to Kinzu. I'm Frame from the Los Angeles Police Department, and this is my colleague, Billy. Hello, I'm Keen. Kinzu extended his hand and shook hands with the other party, and said with a smile, I'm sorry to bother you 2 to come here so early in the morning. I haven't done anything wrong, have I? No, Mr. Clean, you misunderstood. He waved his hands quickly, and the fat policeman explained embarrassedly. It's like this, we came here this time mainly to see your pet breeding certificate. Breeding certificate? Kinzu was stunned when he heard it, and then turned his head to Eva beside him and asked, where are the breeding certificates of our pets? Find them and show them to them. Kinzu usually doesn't care about these things, so he doesn't know where they are, so he can only ask Eva to find them. He believes that Eva will definitely know these. Sure enough, Eva did not disappoint him. After agreeing, she came out with a stack of certificates a while later. Boss, they are all here, including Daha, Shalha and Jack's certificates. Kinzu nodded and pointed at the white policeman opposite, show them to the policeman. Although Kinzu's attitude was a bit perfunctory, the 2 white policemen opposite did not say anything. After taking the certificates, they began to look through them. After a moment, the fat policeman, who was relieved at the stack of certificates in his hands, said with a somewhat embarrassed expression, well, Mr. Clean, let's come this time. In fact, there is something else I want to communicate with you. Anything else? Kinzu narrowed his eyes slightly, and his face became serious. If it was just a check, he could still cooperate readily, but if it involved a few little guys, then the problem would be different. Facing Kinzu's suddenly changed expression, the fat policeman smiled a little embarrassedly. Mr. Clean, actually, the main reason we came this time is because of the 2 raptors you raised. Raptors? What's wrong with raptors? Kinzu interrupted him with a guilty conscience before he could finish his words. Although they are protected animals, the police station has already granted special approval. This, of course I know this, otherwise we wouldn't be here. The fat white policeman's expression froze when he was suddenly interrupted by Kinzu, and then he explained. It's mainly because they have brought some inconvenience to your neighbors in their lives, so we came to mediate. Inconvenience? Mediate? Looking at the fat policeman blankly, Kinzu asked uncertainly. Did anyone call the police? Yes, someone complained that you're disturbing the public. The fat white policeman nodded affirmatively. Kinzu opened his mouth and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Mr. Policeman, are you going to restrict the freedom of raptors? Looking at each other, the two white policemen were also a little embarrassed. Logically speaking, this kind of thing is not their turn to deal with. Because Haha and Pape were just doing things over their own home and they didn't cross the border, so what right did others have to say? But the problem is that sound has great penetrating power, especially when it comes from high altitude. It has a certain impact. Okay, Mr. Policeman, I know about this. Seeing their embarrassed faces, Kinzu smiled and waved his hand. I'll send them away soon, don't worry. The author has already fainted in the toilet. The new book has 6,500 collections, and only 6 people subscribed. I worked hard for 3 months and made only 30 cents a day. Chapter 991 100,000 acres. After sending the two white policemen away, Kinzu returned to the sofa in the living room and sighed helplessly. These guys really don't let people rest. Eva, who was standing by, couldn't help but laugh and said, Boss, this is a gathering place for the world's rich, how can they not be nervous? That's right. Nodding in agreement, Kinzu said with some entanglement, it seems that it is really not suitable to keep these guys here. It is a little inappropriate. Although Eva said it was a little, she felt in her heart that this was no longer a question of whether it was suitable or not, but when they could move out. You know, although the area of the Beverly Hills mansion is not small, compared with their previous ranch, it is simply a world of difference. Not to mention anything else, just take the area of the villa, the area of the mansion in the ranch is more than a little larger than here. Thinking of this, Eva couldn't help but look up. Boss, is there any news about the ranch? Here, let me ask. Touching his nose, Kinzu has been busy enjoying the flowers and the moon these days, how can he have time to care about these issues? A phone call was made to Jefferson. Before Kinzu had time to speak, he heard this guy chattering and reporting. Boss, we're lucky. I have already picked 3 ranches in Montana, with an area of 30,000 acres, 50,000 acres, and 100,000 acres. Wait, Kinzu, who was halfway through listening, couldn't help but interrupt the guy's chattering, and asked in disbelief. How big was the area you just said? 30,000 acres? Jefferson hesitated a little. Could it be that the boss was too idle? Not this. Kinzu shook his head. Then, 50,000 acres? Jefferson's heart was lifted. What's going on? Not this either. Kinzu continued to shake his head. Then 100,000 acres? Jefferson almost cried. What do you mean by asking all this time? Are you satisfied or dissatisfied? Is it really 100,000 acres? Are you sure you didn't read the punctuation wrong? Although he confirmed his thoughts, Kinzu himself was a little afraid to admit it. 100,000 acres, what is that? Converted to the domestic measurement method, 1 acre is equal to 6 acres of land, then what about 100,000 acres? 100,000 acres is equal to 600,000 acres of land. 1 acre of land is 660 square meters, how many square meters are equal to 600,000 acres of land? Kinzu himself was a little dizzy after calculating. He only knew one thing, 100,000 acres must be larger than his county. Yes, boss, it is 100,000 acres. Jefferson, who confirmed Kinzu's guess, explained with a smile. This is a real estate investment of the Moore family in Montana. It was originally prepared to appreciate in value, but who knew that now it has lost so much that it almost cried. Listening to Jefferson's words, Kinzu suddenly caught a different message from it. Jefferson, is the land price in Montana very low now? Hey, boss, don't you know? Jefferson muttered in surprise, and then introduced excitedly. The land price in Montana can no longer be described as low, because of the sanctions imposed by the country in recent years, as well as various comprehensive reasons, the low price in Montana has continued to fall. Then what price did the Moore family offer for this 100,000 acre ranch? Kinzu asked curiously. $120 million US. Jefferson replied excitedly. How much did you say? Kinsey stood up in disbelief. Boss, 120 million. As if he was afraid that Kinsey couldn't hear clearly, Jefferson even emphasized the 120 million. After making sure that there was nothing wrong with his ears, Kinsey didn't know what to say. You know, the 10,000-acre ranch he had before cost $300 million. Although it was because of the addition of the fishery, it was still much more expensive than this 100,000 acres. How is it? Boss, when do you have time to come and take a look? Seeing that there was no sound on the other end of the phone, Jefferson couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. Could it be that the boss thinks it's too big? Thinking about the boss's ranch before, it seems to be only 10,000 acres. Why did he choose a few such large ones? At this time, Jefferson regretted it a little. He shouldn't have listened to Chen Mu's nonsense, saying that the boss must like big ones. This is not a woman, how could she only like big ones? No need to look. The voice coming from the microphone made Jefferson feel cold in his heart. Before he could react, he heard Kinsey continue. That's it, quickly contact the Moore family for me, I want this ranch. Ah? What did you say? This time, it was Jefferson's turn to suspect that there was something wrong with his ears. Do you think this is buying vegetables in the supermarket? More than $100 million, you don't even need to bargain, just take it directly. I said, I want this 100,000-acre ranch. Please contact me as soon as possible. After repeating his words, Kinsey smiled and said, Jefferson, I will only give you 3 days. Can you handle it? What? 3 days? Jefferson couldn't help but shout out in surprise. Involving a transaction involving top dollars and troublesome things like land, do you think it's just a game? Yes, 3 days. After nodding affirmatively, Kinsey suddenly showed a sly smile. Jefferson, I will only give you 3 days, and for every day you handle it in advance, you can get an extra $1 million in bonus. How about it? One day. $1 million? Jefferson swallowed hard and felt his throat dry. That's right, for every day you handle it in advance, you get a bonus of $1 million. Work hard. After saying this, Kinsey didn't give Jefferson a chance to refute and hung up the phone with a smile. He believed that with the stimulation of $1 million bonus, this matter would soon be resolved. After all, I didn't bargain much, so the trouble was nothing more than some procedural issues. Don't think that the efficiency of the American government agencies is very high. All crows are black, and it's the same everywhere. Boss, you are becoming more and more like a capitalist now. Eva, who witnessed the whole process, shook her head helplessly and mourned for the poor guy Jefferson for a second. Why? Aren't capitalists good? Putting the phone aside, Kinsey walked towards Eva step by step. The capitalists are coming to exploit the little sheep now. Where are you running? Ha, you should go find your little sheep. I'm not. Eva dodged Kinsey's clutches with a sweet smile and ran out the door quickly. This early in the morning, she didn't want to be caught by Kinsey and broadcast live. Chapter 992. Get the ranch. It has to be said that in capitalist countries, the power of the US dollar is unparalleled. Kinsey only gave Jefferson 3 days, but this guy actually took only 1 day to complete all the procedures. Boss, as long as you sign, this ranch will belong to you completely. Putting the folder on the coffee table in front of him and pushing it over, Jefferson, with a haggard face, leaned on the sofa and breathed a long sigh of relief. God knows how he survived this day to complete these procedures. Ahem, don't worry about this. Looking at Jefferson's pale face, Kinsey waved his hand awkwardly. You should take a rest first and then come over, otherwise I'm really worried that you will go to see God early. He really didn't expect that this guy would work so hard for the $1 million. Oh, no, it's $1 million a day. Boss, I'm fine, you should take a look at this first. The ranch is still waiting for you to take over. Shaking his head, Jefferson rejected Kinsey's kindness. After all, this ranch is different from the idle ranch before. The idle ranch has been dealt with almost everything, and only a gatekeeper is left. But this large ranch is different. Not only are the cowboys still working normally, but there are still a lot of cattle and sheep. Of course, there can't be too many, otherwise more than $100 million can't handle these. Are you in such a hurry? Seeing Jefferson's insistence, Kinsey didn't refuse and took the contract and took a rough look. Of course, he certainly couldn't understand the specific terms, but this didn't prevent him from paying attention to a few key points. For example, the time of receipt, the amount of payment, and most importantly, the penalty for breach of contract. As for some other terms, Jefferson explained them on the side, and he just listened casually. Okay, if that's the case, then let's do it this way. Picking up the signature pen beside him, Kinzu signed his name on the contract like a dragon flying and a phoenix dancing. Okay, then I'll notify them now. Nodding, Jefferson showed a bright smile on his face. As soon as the money arrives, we can go to take over the ranch. No problem, I'll have someone transfer the money right away. Kinzu took out his cell phone and called Jennifer in front of Jefferson. Of course, he didn't forget the 2 million bounty of the guy in front of him. The money has been transferred, including your share. After hanging up the phone, Kinzu smiled and waved his hand. Now you can go back and rest with peace of mind, right? Oh, God, boss, you're so generous. On the sofa opposite, Jefferson, who received the bank's SMS reminder of the arrival of the money, stood up excitedly. It's nothing, this is what you deserve. Facing Jefferson's grateful eyes, Kinzu also stood up and smiled and stretched out his hand. After this matter is done, I will give you 2 weeks of vacation. You can have a good rest at home. That's really great. Jefferson, who was so excited that he didn't know what to say, held Kinzu's big hand tightly, and the expression on his face was as if he had seen his own god. Okay, go back and rest quickly. Kinzu couldn't stand this guy's enthusiasm, so he quickly drove him away. Ha, boss, that guy is too funny, isn't he? After sending Jefferson away, Eva came back with a smile. Isn't it just a 2-week vacation? Is it like seeing God? How should I know? Spreading his hands, Kinzu lazily collapsed on the sofa, flipping through the contract casually. Is the contract done? Seeing this, Eva didn't continue to dwell on the previous question, and came over with some curiosity. Yes, it's done, a ranch of 100,000 acres. Handing the contract to Eva beside him, Kinzu secretly glanced upstairs, and when he saw that no one was paying attention, his claws immediately reached out. Ah, boss, what are you doing? Eva, who was concentrating on looking at the contract, was suddenly attacked by Kinzu and screamed. SHH, keep your voice down, don't let anyone find out. Putting his finger in front of his mouth and shushing softly, Kinzu looked around like a thief for a while, and rushed to the room next door with Eva in his arms. He knew that Zumengyo must not have gotten up at this time, and the other female bodyguards were probably patrolling outside, so no one would disturb their good deeds for the time being. Hug me, we haven't been intimate for a long time, don't you miss me? Humph, what's the use of missing me? Eva pouted and simply gave up resistance in Kinzu's arms, muttering with some dissatisfaction. Someone knows how to accompany his wife all day long, and he almost forgot about us, right? How could it be? With an awkward smile, Kinzu closed the door and fell on the bed with Eva in his arms. Aren't you busy recently? I won't be in the future. I will definitely visit you more often. Humph, I hope so. After being coaxed by Kinzu for a few words, Eva gradually became proactive, and the battle was about to break out. Bang bang bang, just as the dry wood and the fire were about to burn, a rapid knock on the door made the two bodies stiffen. Little sister, are you in there? Standing at the door of the room, Dale knocked gently and asked with a complicated look. Have you seen the boss? Boss? I didn't see him. Eva shuddered all over and sat up from the bed, a little flustered. Go look outside, I think I saw him go out just now. Really? Then I'll go look for him. Hearing the sound outside the door gradually fade away, the two people in the room were relieved. However, when Kinzu came to his senses, he regretted it. What is this man afraid of? At most, I can just pull him in together. It's just a pity that the opportunity has been missed. How could Eva, who was found out about her hardship by her sister, still have the nerve to continue messing around with him? The next morning, Jefferson, who had finally recovered some energy after a day's rest, stood in front of the villa in Beverly Hills in a casual outfit, looking at Kinzu and his group with a smile on his face. Boss, can we set off now? Jefferson bowed slightly and pointed to the row of cars behind him. The cars are ready. Almost done, let's get in the car first. Nodding at this guy, Kinzu, surrounded by a group of female bodyguards, took Zumengyo and the other girls, as well as Kinru, the little follower, and walked straight to the car team. What are the plans for today? After getting in the car, Kinzu looked at Jefferson in the co-pilot seat and asked with a smile. Is everything over there ready? Of course, boss. Turning around, Jefferson raised a few photos in his hand. Yesterday afternoon, I asked the housekeeping company to clean up everything inside and outside. That's good, well done. Nodding, Kinzu looked at Jefferson, who was in good spirits but still a little sluggish, and said helplessly, "After you're done with today, you should take a good rest for half a month. If you get tired and have problems, I can't afford the responsibility." Chapter 993 Henry's Concern. Boom boom, with a deafening roar, a silver-white business jet landed smoothly at the Billings airport. Kinzu, who walked out of the airport surrounded by people, breathed a long sigh of relief. It's still comfortable here. The air is full of fragrance, much fresher than Boston. Of course, the land of the sky is not given for nothing. Stretching, Zumengyo also breathed a long sigh of relief and said with a smile, "I was originally going to tell you that you should just come here to develop, but who knew that you would buy the ranch without saying anything? Hehe, well, it's not a big deal, it's just over $100 million US. Kinzu touched his nose embarrassedly and scolded himself in his heart. He shouldn't have thought of telling this lady before buying the ranch. Now, this lady is obviously angry and came to settle accounts with him. HMPH, with a cold snort, Zumengyo moved her long legs closer to Kinzu. $100 million is not a lot. It seems that you have quite a lot of money in your treasury. No. Kinzu was almost sweating after hearing what Zumengyo said, and waved his hand and said, "Well, Jefferson, go find a car quickly, let's go to the ranch first." "Boss, there's no need to be so troublesome." Jefferson, who was following behind him, smiled and explained, "When I got on the plane, I had already notified the ranch, and now they are probably almost here." "Really? Good job." Touching his nose, Kinzu smiled and praised this guy, and then continued to walk forward with everyone. "This guy, I'll deal with you when I go back tonight." Zumengyo muttered with a smile, and did not continue to pester him, and followed him directly. "Hey, man, this way." As soon as they arrived at the parking lot, a slightly overweight white cowboy wearing cowboy clothes, riveted shoes, and a white-brimmed hat stood in front of a pickup truck and waved his big hand at them. "Hey, O'Broom, why did you come here in person? Where are they?" As if he was very familiar with this white cowboy, Jefferson smiled and hugged him, and then greeted him familiarly. "They are here too." Pointing to the pickup trucks parked on both sides, the white old cowboy with a big belly smiled and explained, "Didn't you say that there were more people coming? So I pulled a few guys over." Listening to the old guy's words, Jefferson almost cried. "I asked you to prepare the car, and you just got a few broken pickup trucks to pretend?" Fortunately, Kinzu didn't mean to be disgusted. After seeing that it was a car to pick him up, he began to greet everyone to get in the car. "Boss, this is the former steward of the Golden Ranch, Odom Johnson." Jefferson pulled the old cowboy to Kinzu and introduced him respectfully. "Hello, Mr. O'Broom, I'm Keen." Kinzu nodded with a smile and shook his hand. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Keen." Facing Kinzu, Odom was no longer as casual as he was in front of Jefferson, and greeted him a little stiffly. O'Broom, don't be nervous, I'm still easy to get along with." Kinzu shrugged helplessly when he saw this. "If you don't believe me, just ask Jefferson and you'll know. I'm not the kind of boss that's difficult to get along with." "Of course, I heard Jefferson say that you were a very generous boss." Odom looked at Kinzu seriously. Kinzu opened his mouth and was a little speechless. "It feels like I give people the impression that there is nothing else except generosity." Glancing at Jefferson, Kinzu didn't say anything, but the message in his eyes still made this guy feel a little uneasy. "Ahem, O'Broom, let's go back first and talk about it when we get back." Jefferson coughed twice in embarrassment. He didn't dare to let this guy continue talking, and called Kinzu to get in the car. "Boss, your phone number." Just as he sat in the back seat of the pickup truck, Eva handed him a mobile phone. She was supposed to study at school, but after hearing that the little guys didn't eat, she flew back overnight. Of course, it was useless. "Phone? Who is this?" Kinzu picked up the phone while signaling Odom that he could drive. "Hey, my dear friend, you're really sad by doing this." The incoherent words penetrated Kinzu's ears through the microphone, making him look slightly stunned. "Henry, what's wrong with you?" Kinzu, who was a little confused, thought for a long time, and finally decided to ask the reason directly. Otherwise, he really didn't know how to continue the conversation since it was so incoherent. "Fuck. Clean, it seems that you still don't regard me as a friend." Cursing softly, Prince Henry said unhappily, "What did those guys do? They actually bought your ranch. And why don't you tell me what's going on? Why do you want to sell the ranch?" After listening to the long chatter on the other end of the phone, Kinzu finally understood the whole story. Ahem, well, Henry, don't get me wrong, Ben Kaza wouldn't dare to cheat me. Kinzu leaned back after 2 dry coughs, and explained with a smile. This matter was consensual from the beginning to the end, and I haven't suffered any grievances. How is it possible? Shaking his head in disbelief, Henry said with disdain. Just relying on the greedy faces of those guys, without enough benefits, would they be willing to pay such a high price to buy your ranch? Touching his nose, Kinzu thought for a while, and said with a smile. Henry, this matter is actually nothing. They just think that there are things they need in that forest, so they want to buy my ranch to make it easier for them to do things. What do they need? Henry muttered a few times with some doubts, and asked. Then they didn't make things difficult for you, did they? Of course not, with your relationship covering them, they dare not mess around. Smiling and complimenting a few words, Kinzu pretended to be helpless and said, in order to get me to sell the ranch, these guys treat money as nothing, so I'm embarrassed to say I don't want to sell it. Ha, it's okay. These guys have plenty of money. After confirming that Kinzu was not threatened by those guys, Henry felt much better. After all, he was the one who introduced the person to Kinzu. If he was bullied by these guys, then he would be doing something back with good intentions. Si est escuchando esta novela en un canal distinto a mundo fanfic novelas, significat lo descarga and y subir en sinisfuerzos invitamos cordialmente a visitar nuestro canal. Mundo fanfic novelas all encontras la versión original de esta historia y podrás explorar muchas otras novelas de diversos narradores. Te esperamos para sumergirte en un mundo de novelas increíbles. Chapter 994 Arrival. Beep beep, a line of 5 Ford pickup trucks faced the midday sun and sped alone on the wide and straight interstate highway. If Kinzu had not felt what sparsely populated was when he was in Boston, he now fully understood it. After leaving Billings, they had been walking for more than 2 hours, but they had not seen even a single car. If the person accompanying him had not changed, Kinzu would have even thought that he was still driving by himself, instead of driving around a big city in Montana. Oh Broom, is there no one living around Billings? Kinzu, who had been holding back for a long time, finally couldn't help but asked. He knew that Americans were few in number and had a large territory, but that was generally in remote towns or some small cities. But now, they were in Billings, one of the few big cities in Montana. Boss, of course there are people living around Billings. Oh Broom, who was in the driver's seat, heard Kinzu's question and turned around with a smile. However, Billings is large, and there are not many people living there, so you won't see many people along the way. You won't see many people. Kinzu curled his lips and thought to himself, you won't see anyone, okay? Ha, boss, you have to get used to this situation. Jefferson, who was sitting in the co-pilot seat, couldn't help but interrupt as he listened to the conversation between the two. In Montana, there are many more cows than people, so if you live here permanently, you can adapt to this situation as soon as possible. More cows than people? Kinzu and Zumengyo beside him looked at each other, both feeling a little bad. However, it seems that it is too late to regret now. Boss, we're at the ranch. As Odom finished speaking, the leading pickup truck turned directly off the interstate highway. Are we finally there? Kinzu took a long breath, sat up, and stretched his body, which was a little stiff due to long-term driving. If I had known it was so far, I should have flown a helicopter over here. Come on. Zumengyo, who was standing beside him, rolled her eyes at Kinzu. Do you know how far the straight line distance is from Los Angeles to Billings? This, touching his nose, Kinzu smiled awkwardly and said, they can take turns to fly. Zumengyo, who was speechless after being choked by Kinzu, simply put her little hand on someone's waist. What did you say just now? No, I didn't say anything. Kinzu raised his hand with a black face, and he hated it in his heart. Who did this girl learn this 9-yin white bone claw from? Every time she can't win the argument, she uses this one. Can't she change it? Half an hour passed in the blink of an eye during the fight, but the convoy was still speeding on a dirt road. Oh Broom, aren't we at the ranch? Kinzu calmed down and looked out the window. There was still no change, the endless green grassland. He couldn't help but look at the old cowboy who was driving with some doubts. Yes, this is your ranch. Without looking back, Odin drove and explained with a smile. Boss, from the end of the interstate highway to the foot of the Rocky Mountains, it's your ranch. "Oh my," turning his head to look at the vaguely visible mountains in the distance, and then looking back at the interstate highway that had long disappeared, Qinzhou finally understood the concept of 100,000 acres. This is not something that can be clearly expressed by the previous Tycoon ranch the 10th 10. "Boss, don't worry, we're almost there." Jefferson smiled and said, "When I first came here, I thought the driver was taking a detour with me. If it weren't for the fact that I didn't have to pay, I would have argued with him." Qinzhou, who was still a little shocked, couldn't help laughing when he heard it. "You can let others do whatever you want without paying, right? Where's your courage? If someone dares to do that to you, why don't you just teach him a lesson?" "Hee, you can't say that." Jefferson smiled disapprovingly and said confidently, "You only have one life. As long as you can live, what does this little money mean?" Although Qinzhou didn't agree with Jefferson's words, he didn't rush to refute. He smiled indifferently and let the matter go. There is no way, there are still many conflicts between the concepts of Eastern and Western people. For example, the matter of overcharging tourists. If it were in China, most people would definitely not let it go and there was solid evidence. But it's different here in the United States. Not to mention that there is no evidence. Even if there is evidence, their first reaction after being bullied is to run away quickly. As for making trouble for them, oh God, don't joke. That's what the police should do. Otherwise, what are we paying taxes for? Beep. While thinking, a convoy stopped steadily at the door of a villa built on a hillside. "Are we there yet?" Qinzhou came back to his senses and asked curiously when he saw Odom opening the car door and preparing to get out. "Of course, boss, we're here." Turning around, Odom looked at Qinzhou with some doubt. He had clearly reported it just now. Could it be that the new boss had a problem with his ears? Qinzhou didn't know that just because he was distracted, Odom actually blamed him for having a problem with his ears. After getting off the car, standing next to the pickup truck, Qinzhou began to look at the villa in front of him, which was full of European style. Perhaps because he had been a younger brother before, although the United States has been independent for many years, it has always been influenced by Europe in terms of architecture and diet. Including this villa in front of him, which covers a large area. He currently has no idea about the specific interior, but he can tell from the outside that this villa is not very good. Yes, this large villa built on the hillside gave Qinzhou a bad feeling. How to say it? It was as if it had been destroyed by war. Although it was not a ruin, the green ivy covering the roof and walls still gave it a gloomy atmosphere. "Jefferson, is this the place you picked for me?" Qinzhou turned around and glared at the guy with an ugly expression. Could it be that the bonus was too easy for this guy to do his job without paying attention at all? "Boss, don't get excited. Listen to me first." Jefferson walked up with a wry smile and led Qinzhou to the steps of the villa, while explaining. This villa was built by the rancher himself. The Moore family never lived in it after buying it, so, Chapter 995 Retro Wooden Villa. The sun at noon was so bright that some people couldn't open their eyes. In the clear blue sky, a few strangely shaped clouds were slowly flowing, looking so leisurely and elegant. On the ground, Qinzhou followed Jefferson and walked slowly towards the villa in front of him, which looked a bit old. The reason why he said it was a bit old was that this villa was not a common brick and stone structure in modern times, but a wooden structure that was popular in the last century. "Jefferson, are you sure people can still live here?" Walking on the wooden stairs in front of the villa, listening to the creaking sound of the stairs under his feet as he walked, Qinzhou's expression was a bit helpless. "Of course, boss, this place is definitely habitable, and there is no need to worry about safety." Taking out the key and opening the door of the villa, Jefferson walked in, turned around and smiled and said, "I slept here the day before yesterday, and it felt really great." "No way," Qinzhou pouted his lips in disapproval after listening to the words of the guy in front of him. However, although he was a little bit unconvinced, he still stepped in. After all, he couldn't regret it now. Hey, the decoration here. As soon as he stepped into the gate of the villa, Qinzhou suddenly felt that the world in front of him seemed a little different. The green creeps were neatly arranged on some exquisite wooden frames, and the combination was just right. The odd-shaped rockery was divided in the middle by a clear spring. Although it was a bit messy, it looked uniquely beautiful. Above the clear spring, a retro small arch bridge stood leisurely, as if telling its own persistence. Even though the sunshine in early April was a bit dazzling, Qinzhou felt quite comfortable standing here. "How about it, boss? It feels good here, right?" Seeing that Qinzhou's expression finally relaxed a little, Jefferson's heart was relieved. Although before coming here, he felt that Kinzu would definitely like it here, that was just his feeling after all. He didn't dare to be sure without practical testing. Very good design. Nodding, Kinzu did not hide his love for it, and asked with a smile, "Whose handicraft is this? The previous owner of the villa should not have such a refined taste, right? Boss, you are still smart." Giving a thumbs up, Jefferson explained with a flattering smile on his face. The interior environment here was renovated after the Moore family bought the manor. It was not like this before. In that case, why didn't they tear it down and build a new one? Kinzu pointed to the wooden wall outside the villa. In his opinion, this kind of wooden structure house should have been eliminated long ago. I'm not sure about this. Shaking his head, Jefferson was also a little puzzled. Perhaps, this has something to do with the steward of the Moore family here before. Steward? What does this have to do with him? Kinzu paused, stood by the arch bridge that spanned over the clear spring, and looked at Jefferson with a puzzled look. Does the steward have the right to change this villa into this? If it's just an ordinary steward, of course it's not possible, but she is different. Jefferson waved his hand with a smile and took the lead to walk across the bridge. What's the difference? Kinzu smiled and followed Jefferson, and couldn't help but joked. Could this steward be the concubine of some big shot in the Moore family? Concubine? Jefferson looked at Kinzu blankly, and it was obvious that he didn't understand the meaning of the word concubine. Ahem, what I mean is this steward the concubine of some big shot in the Moore family? Kinzu was a little helpless when he saw this, so he had to use the word concubine instead. Now you should know it, right? Oh, no, boss, it's not what you think. Who knew that? When this guy heard what Kinzu said, he hurriedly raised his hand. She is not anyone's concubine, she is the eldest daughter of the Moore family and the first heir. What? Kinzu looked at Jefferson in a daze. Did this guy have a fever? When will a woman be the first heir in a family? Well, maybe you say that gender equality is advocated now, and there are strong women in Europe and the United States. However, in those big families, these things are absolutely impossible to happen. Even if the family business is inherited by a collateral branch, it is absolutely impossible to pass it on to a woman. Of course, these are all well known to everyone, and no one will make special regulations. Otherwise, the Queen will ask you to have a good talk about the issue of gender equality. Boss, I think you should understand this. Shrugging his shoulders, Jefferson said with some emotion, this is nothing more than an attitude they used to deal with the Queen. If they really intend to let her inherit the family business, they will not put her in this barren ranch. Okay, that's true. Smiling and walking forward a few steps, after crossing the arch bridge, Kinzu also said with some emotion, sometimes I really feel that things are impermanent. For us, the ranch is already a career, but for those big families, it is just a place to accommodate idle people. Hehe. Jefferson could only pretend that he didn't hear Kinzu's complaints, shrugged his shoulders, and took him to continue walking in the villa. There is no way, it's really hard to respond. Who made him just a working-class lawyer? After crossing the arch bridge, they walked up a few hundred meters and finally arrived at the front door of the villa. Wife, what do you think of this villa? Without rushing in, Kinzu walked around the gate twice and turned his head to look at Zumengyo beside him. Me? It's pretty good. Zumengyo, who had remained silent all the way and listened quietly to the two men chatting, smiled and said, not only is the environment nice, the decoration inside is also very tasteful, I like it very much. Little sister, how about you? Hearing Zumengyo say that she liked it, Kinzu looked at Kinru again. This little girl didn't know whether it was because there were so many people or she had something on her mind. She didn't talk as much as before along the way, and seemed a little taciturn. It's okay, it's pretty good. Looking up and taking a casual glance, Kinru lowered her head again, looking at her toes, not knowing what she was thinking. Now, not only Kinzu felt something was wrong, but even Zumengyo and Eva, the women, also found that their sister-in-law was abnormal. However, there were still many outsiders here. Although they were a little curious, they just looked at each other and didn't say anything. Well, since everyone thinks it's good, let's go in and take a look. Kinzu pursed his lips, glanced at his little sister, and led the way in, while thinking in his heart that he would go to talk to her in the evening. Chapter 996 Kinzu, who values women over girls. Because they found that Kinru was not in a good state, Kinzu and his friends had no interest in studying the decoration inside the villa. After a rough tour of the villa, they sat down in the reception room. Boss, what do you think? Is there anything that needs to be changed? Sitting in front of a round coffee table, Jefferson looked at Kinzu across from him seriously, and the record book in his hand was ready. For that time being, it's not bad. Kinzu nodded casually, and did not rush to answer Jefferson, but looked at Zumengyo beside him. Wife, what do you think? Is there anything else to change? Zumengyo, who was looking at Kinru with some worry, shrugged indifferently after hearing the words. It's not bad, I have no objection. Okay, that's it. After seeing that Zumengyo had no objection, Kinzu made a direct decision. The villa will remain as it is, no need to change anything, we will move in 2 days. Yes, the purpose of their coming today was just to take a look first. The most important thing is that Kinzu was afraid that Zumengyo and the others would not like the environment here, so he came to take a look first, and if it didn't work, he would tear it down and rebuild it. However, what they didn't expect was that this shabby-looking villa brought them a big surprise. Okay, boss, I understand. Jefferson closed the record book with both hands and breathed a sigh of relief. At this point, he basically didn't need to worry about it anymore, and the $2 million was also taken with ease. However, he was relaxed, but some people became nervous. Ahem, Mr. Clean, Mr. Clean. After 2 dry coughs, Odom stood up a little stiffly. Mr. Clean, I wonder what your plans are for the future. Looking at this guy, Kinzu's expression was a little puzzled. Why does this sound so familiar? After a little hesitation, Kinzu realized that this was not what old John asked him when he just took over the Tycoon ranch. Ha, oh Bloom, don't worry. After pushing down with his hand and motioning the guy to sit down, Kinzu smiled and said, I have no plans to fire the current employees of the ranch. Of course, if anyone wants to resign, you just need to sign and you don't have to report to me. Okay. Nodding as if relieved, Odom also showed a smile on his face. Mr. Clean, I think everyone is willing to resign on their own initiative. After all, it's not easy to find a job around here. Really? Kinzu raised his lips slightly and ordered meaningfully, well, Bloom, tell them that as long as they resign on their own initiative, I will subsidize them for 3 months' salary in addition to this month's salary. Huh. The smile on his face froze, and Odom's mouth was almost unable to close in surprise. What's going on? Subsidizing 3 months' salary after resigning? Even if it's fired, it can't be so much, right? What does this young Haitian man in front of him want to do? What's wrong? Did you hear clearly? Kinzu didn't give him too much time to think, and urged him with a frown. Listen, boss, I heard it. After coming back to his senses, Odom hurriedly agreed. Although he didn't understand Kinzu's intention, what did it have to do with him? Anyway, he didn't plan to resign. However, Odom estimated that there would be many guys who couldn't see the reality and resigned for the 3-month salary. Anyway, cowboy jobs are still easy to find in Montana, and there is more money, so why not? What Odom thought was exactly what Kinzu thought. He did this for no other reason, mainly to make room for the old team members of his Tycoon ranch. In other words, he was clearing obstacles for the future helmsman of the ranch. A new emperor appoints new ministers. The ranch has a new owner, so the manager must be replaced by his own talents to feel at ease. The reason why old John was not replaced when taking over the Tycoon ranch was because Kinzu didn't know many people at the time. It's different now. Even if all the cowboys in the ranch were cleared, he was confident that he could build a trustworthy cowboy team in a short period of time. This was the benefit of having someone under him. Boss, should we go back first or eat something here before going back? After everything was discussed, Jefferson looked at the time and couldn't help but touch his stomach. It was already noon, but he had eaten something when he set out in the morning, and he was already starving. After being reminded by Jefferson, Kinzu also felt that his stomach was rebelling again, and couldn't help but look at Odom beside him. Although they were on his territory now, Kinzu found it very sad that if this old cowboy didn't take care of the food, they would be hungry today. Fortunately, Odom was an old cowboy after all, and the necessary preparations had been made long ago. Standing up slowly, Odom smiled and invited Kinzu and the others. Boss, it's already noon, let's go eat something first, Gray and the others should be ready. Okay, let's go eat something first. Kinzu nodded and agreed without hesitation. He didn't want to go back on an empty stomach, that kind of feeling was still very uncomfortable. As for going to the nearby town, well, the nearest one would take more than an hour to drive, which was a big troublesome. After leaving the villa, everyone got on the pickup truck again, led by Odom, and drove towards the living area of the ranch. Little girl, what's wrong? It was only at this time that Kinzu had time to care about his little sister. Nothing. After a moment of daze, Kinru looked over with an innocent face, as if nothing had really happened. Your little girl. Kinzu smiled helplessly and pinched Kinru's little nose lovingly. You've been hanging your head all the way, and it's nothing. Tell me, who bullied our little princess again? Oh, I'm not a child anymore, don't pinch me. Shaking her little head, Kinru dodged the annoying big hand, and stole a glance at Zumengyo sitting next to her. Seeing that she was looking at her, she couldn't help but stick out her tongue and quickly change the subject. It's really nothing, brother, you should think about how we can go back. I don't want to sit in the car for so long. Are you tired? Touching his nose, Kinzu realized that he had been sitting in the car since morning until now, and a relatively weak girl would indeed feel tired. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but turn his head with some concern. Wife, are you tired? Bias brother. You don't even know how to care about others. Rolling her eyes, Kinru couldn't help but complain about her brother's preference for women over girls. It's already 1000 chapters, which is not easy. Thanks to all the friends who have recently rewarded Liu-un. Thank you for your support. As long as you are here, Liu-un will continue to write. Chapter 997 Douglas's Helplessness. Although Kinzu did value women over women, that was only relative. So, when Kinru was feeling depressed, she heard Kinzu in front of her making a phone call. Hi, Doug, are you busy? Kinzu smiled as he held the phone. Of course, I'm not busy. Douglas's voice sounded a little excited through the microphone. Clean, I didn't expect that you actually know so many princes. When can we have a chat? Touching his nose, Kinzu smiled awkwardly. We just met by chance. I can't invite them. Just kidding, he had screwed those guys over. If he really introduced them to each other, the Douglas family would probably be in trouble. Well, that's a pity. He shrugged helplessly. Although he knew that Kinzu was shirking, Douglas was not angry. There was no way. Compared with the relationship with those guys, this matter was nothing. I'm really sorry. Kinzu was also a little helpless about this. Hearing Douglas' disappointed tone, he was a little embarrassed to speak. Always asking for help but never reporting, this seems a bit unkind. How about this, Doug? I might go to England next month, let's go together then. England? Why go there? As soon as Douglas asked the question, he wanted to slap himself. Isn't this nonsense? Isn't Prince Henry in England? Clean, I'm honored to receive your invitation, then I'll wait for your call next month. No problem, I'll notify you in advance. After agreeing with a smile, Kinzu told him the purpose of his visit this time. Helicopter. No problem at all, where are you now? I'll send someone over right away. Hearing Kinzu say that he wanted to borrow 2 helicopters from him for transportation, Douglas agreed immediately. However, when he heard where Kinzu was, he was stunned. What? You're in Montana? Douglas opened his mouth in surprise, with a look of astonishment on his face, as if he saw his own gorilla suddenly turned into King Kong. I just came here to investigate the investment environment. Kinzu touched his nose, feeling a little puzzled by this guy's fuss. Isn't it just in Montana? Is it really that surprising? Investment environment. Clean, are you going to move the ranch there? Hearing Kinzu's tone, Douglas reacted immediately, as if relieved. That's not bad, Montana is indeed very suitable for ranching. Well, then why are you reacting so much? Kinzu complained speechlessly. Well, didn't I think you were going to Montana to do some investment project? With a sheepish smile, Douglas explained. Montana is a damn place, it's only suitable for ranching. If you change to other projects, you will lose as much as you invest. Is that so? Listening to Doug's explanation, Kinzu was also somewhat relieved. What this guy said was indeed true. For example, the Moore family bought such a large ranch, but he didn't think about developing it. So far, after a few years, it really hasn't appreciated a penny. What else? Doug shrugged, pondered for a moment, and said a little embarrassedly, how about this, Clean, wait for me to make a call first. What's wrong? Isn't your company here? Kinzu looked at the blue sky and white clouds outside the window with some doubts, and asked curiously. In his opinion, Montana is vast and sparsely populated, and the transportation is good. Although the main output is agriculture, wouldn't it be better to open a factory here? You really guessed it right. Nodding helplessly, Douglas smiled bitterly and said, Our main industries are in several states and counties near New York. Although there are some in other places, they are all offices and the like. There'll definitely not be so many helicopters. Okay, then you take a look. If it doesn't work, I'll take a car back. Kinzu hung up the phone with some disappointment, and then he found that the pickup truck had stopped in front of a house. What's wrong? Are we there? Looking at Odom in that driver's seat, Kinzu was a little confused. Yes, boss, this is the living area. Nodding, Odom opened the car door and got out, while introducing Kinzu. Let's go, let's follow. After giving an order to the women around him, Kinzu also opened the car door and got out. However, after getting out of the car, Kinzu was a little dazed by the situation in front of him. This ranch with an area of nearly 100,000 acres, the living area is not even as big as his small ranch of 10,000 acres. Odom, how many cowboys are there on the ranch now? Kinzu asked in confusion after taking 2 quick steps and catching up with Odom. Fortunately, there was no one else present at this time, otherwise they would definitely be shocked. The boss of his own ranch didn't even know how many employees there were. Boss, there aren't many cowboys now. Odom stopped and pointed to some small houses around him, and introduced them with a smile. Because the Moore family didn't think about developing the breeding industry, or didn't want to develop agriculture, there aren't many cowboys in the ranch. Including me, there are only 12 cowboys. 12? Touching his chin, Kinzu nodded thoughtfully and said nothing more. Anyway, he was used to it. Who let him not understand the ideas of the rich? Come on, boss, we're here. When the group walked to the outside of the largest bungalow inside, Odom stopped and pushed open the iron door. Is lunch ready? The boss is here, everyone welcomed him. The voice came before the person, and before the people walked into the house, Odom's voice rang around. Hello, boss, As Odom's voice fell, several men and women who were still surrounding the yard stood up immediately. Well, everyone, sit down. Smiling and waving his hands, Kinzu nodded to several guys one by one, and then sat on the sofa beside him under the guidance of Odom. Boss, there is nothing good, we can only fill our stomachs first. After everyone was seated, Odom asked people to bring out a large barrel of beer and many snacks and drinks. It's okay, anything that can fill your stomach is good. After joking with a smile, Kinzu cast his eyes to the side curiously. There, several guys were gathered together, seemingly tossing around a barbecue grill. Thank you for the 1,100 book coins reward from Bitter Tears Hard to Swallow, thank you. There will be updates, and there will be bread, chapter 998 on the importance of relationships. Rumble, with bursts of roars, 2 black helicopters painted with Union Jacks slowly landed in front of the ranch villa. Hello, is this Mr. Clean? The cabin door opened, and a sturdy, fully armed American soldier jumped down from the co-pilot seat. Yes, it's me, hello. Kinzu, who was waiting in front of the villa, smiled and greeted him. Although Dub Group doesn't have much business here, don't forget what their main business is. So, after Douglas took the initiative to communicate with the military, 2 transport helicopters happened to pass by here today. Hello, Mr. Clean, let's get on the plane quickly, time is a bit tight. After confirming Kinzu's identity, the American soldier saluted very politely, and then urged them to board the plane quickly. After all, their flight records must be filed. If they are late for too long for no reason, even if someone is responsible, it will be a troublesome matter. No problem, I'll go now. Nodding knowingly, Kinzu turned around and looked at the people behind him, smiling and waving his hand. Did you hear that? Get on the plane quickly. As Kinzu's voice fell, several female bodyguards boarded the helicopter first, and came out a moment later and nodded at Kinzu, indicating that there was no danger. Kinzu was also helpless about the actions of the female bodyguards. If they really wanted to harm you, wouldn't they let you do whatever they wanted after you got into the sky? However, this was their duty after all, and Kinzu couldn't say anything. After waiting until the women around him and the bodyguards got on the plane, Kinzu smiled and said to the old cowboy beside him, Odom, count how many people are ready to resign in the next few days, I will go back first. Okay, boss, I understand. Odom agreed with some helplessness. Although after a barbecue lunch, Kinzu didn't seem to have any intention of changing his decision. Alas, I don't know how many people will choose to leave this time. Watching Kinzu walk onto the helicopter, the old cowboy couldn't help but sigh deeply, and turn towards his car. He couldn't control other people's choices. The only thing he could do is to do what Kinzu told him to do. Brother, I'm so full. Sitting in the cabin of the military transport plane, Kinru touched her belly in a coquettish way. In order to welcome the arrival of the new boss today, the cowboys really prepared a lot of delicious food. There are all kinds of delicious food, not to mention the little girl. Even Kinzu, who was used to eating delicious food, feels fresh. It's not that the food here is better than that in his ranch, it's just that the cooking method is different, giving people a different feeling. Of course, the little girl, who didn't have much resistance to delicious food, naturally fell. Your little girl, you also know how to feel full? Helplessly reaching out to rub Kinru's little head, Kinzu said unhappily. Who just ate everything like a starving ghost? Did I starve you before? This, Kinru smiled embarrassedly, her face a little red as she muttered. Isn't it because those guys are too good at cooking? It's just ordinary beef, but they made it feel different. TSK, it's just that there are a few more ingredients, it's all seasoning. Although he felt that what the little girl said made sense, Kinzu still smiled and criticized. Little foodies are little foodies, just admit it. Humph, you were a foodie. Touching her bloated belly, Kinru snorted in dissatisfaction and turned to look at Zumengyo behind her. Sister-in-law, you should take care of my brother, he bullies people. Bullying people? Really? Zumengyo, who looked at Kinzu, shrugged in confusion. I didn't see it. How did he bully you? You are all bad guys. The little girl who was successfully provoked by the two unscrupulous guys didn't care that they were still on the plane. She threw herself into Zumengyo's arms, acting coquettishly and tickling her. Zumengyo didn't care about her sister-in-law's resistance at all. After holding her little head, she decisively fought back. Now, the cabin, which was originally a bit dull, was suddenly filled with the laughter and playfulness of girls. Kinzu never interfered in the affairs between women. Seeing them quarreling, he took the initiative to move to the front. What's wrong? Boss. Jefferson, who was planning where to go for vacation tomorrow, was stunned when he saw Kinzu coming. Nothing, just come and sit for a while. Shrugging his shoulders, Kinzu gestured to the back with a helpless expression. Shara is very lively. Turning his head and seeing the situation at the back of the cabin, Jefferson smiled and praised. Lively? That's too lively. Kinzu curled his lips and stopped talking. He closed his eyes and began to rest. However, only he knew what he was thinking. The speed of a helicopter is not comparable to that of a car. It took them nearly 2 hours to get here, but only more than 20 minutes to get back. After getting off the helicopter and waving to a few soldiers, Kinzu looked at the time with a serious expression. We can't go on like this. It's a waste of time. Boss, what did you say? Jefferson, who couldn't keep up with Kinzu's jumping thoughts, looked at the serious boss with a blank face. What happened again? Oh, nothing. Shrugging his shoulders, facing the stunned people around him, Kinzu explained helplessly. I just think that if it's so troublesome every time I go out in the future, it will be really bad. Jefferson looked around and shrugged helplessly. For now, it should be like this. No. Kinru shook her little hand. Brother, don't we have a helicopter at home? Just drive it over here. Okay, little girl, it's not that simple. Kinzu smiled and patted the little girl's head, and explained. The distance is too far, the helicopter can't come over, and even if it comes over, it's a bit troublesome to use it here, after all, it has been modified. But how did we use it before? Kinru looked at her brother blankly, and felt that her little heart was hit. It was the first time that she put forward such a constructive suggestion, but it was ignored. Kinzu touched his nose unconsciously. It was really difficult for him to answer this question from his little sister. Should he just say that this is because your brother has connections in Boston, so he can use it? But here, your brother has no connections, so he dare not use it. In that case, I don't know what the little girl would think. Chapter 999. The disappointing daddy. Although Kinzu was merciless when he attacked Kinru, the little girl's words still moved him. If he couldn't just drive the previous helicopter over, wouldn't he buy another one? Boss, I think you might as well buy a business jet directly. Jefferson, who had figured out the whole story, suggested with a smile. Business jet? Kinzu was stunned when he heard this. Yeah, if you want to buy one, you might as well buy a business jet directly. Nodding, Jefferson explained. Boss, the helicopter has a short range, that's well known, and the most annoying thing is that this guy makes too much noise. Rubbing his ears, Jefferson looked helpless. If he could choose, he would rather take a car, after all, he didn't care much about time. That's true. Kinzu nodded thoughtfully. However, he didn't make a decision immediately. Because compared with business jets, helicopters also have many advantages. The most important one is that they can take off and land anytime and anywhere. Even in complex terrain, as long as the driver's skills are good, they can land safely. But business jets can't do that. Buying a business jet is a small matter. The key is that after buying it, you still have to build a runway. Of course, you can park it directly at the city airport. However, in that case, it would be meaningless for Kinzu to buy it. While talking, several people had already checked in and boarded the plane to Los Angeles. Time passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, 3 days had passed since returning from the ranch inspection. During these 3 days, Kinzu went back and forth to Boston several times and completely settled the ranch business. Of course, the most important thing is that he had dinner with Sayu and the others one by one during these days, which was considered as a farewell. The reason why he remembered them was because his younger sister Kinru secretly reminded him that her sister Sayu had called several times. Otherwise, with Kinzu's current busy state, how could he have time to say goodbye? However, the results are often unexpected. Kinzu originally thought that having a meal together and saying something was considered a farewell. After all, there was no deep relationship between them. However, just before he was leaving, Sayu said with a smile, "Clean, I will come to see you after I finish my graduation. Shaura's class is not over yet." Faced with the beautiful woman's smiling words, Kinzu opened his mouth, but he was embarrassed to refuse. In the end, Kinzu handed over the address honestly and flew back with a confused face. "Brother, you're back." As soon as he entered the villa, the younger sister came over immediately. However, after seeing that Kinzu looked a little unnatural, she thought that this guy was sad because he couldn't see those women. She couldn't help but stand up for Mengyo again. "How could you do this? Sister Mengyo is sincere to you, Kinzu covered his mouth when he was halfway through his words, hearing something wrong. "What are you talking about, your little girl? Don't you know your sister-in-law is here?" "TSK," after struggling to break free from Kinzu's clutches, the little girl said with dissatisfaction, "My sister-in-law and Deepa went out shopping. Do you think you are still a child? You don't know anything. What else?" Rolling his eyes, Kinzu didn't argue with the little girl after hearing that Mengyo went out. He lay lazily on the soft sofa and closed his eyes to rest. HMPH, annoying brother. Kinru pouted her lips. Seeing that Kinzu seemed to be in a bad mood, she didn't continue to provoke this guy. She turned around and walked out. "I'm going to play with her. You stay at home alone." Go, Kinzu waved his hand casually without even opening his eyes. He was really tired. Tired at heart. He was already entangled between several women, and now there were a few more people to join in the fun. "Boss, someone is looking for you outside." Kinzu, who had just been quiet for a while, was awakened by Erika's voice. "Who is it?" Kinzu turned over lazily and muttered unconsciously, "Just say I'm not here." "It's Miss Heidi." When mentioning Heidi's name, Erika's voice unconsciously carried a hint of strangeness. "There is no way, who makes this girl's worth enough?" "Who?" Kinzu heard Heidi's name in a daze, and he suddenly became much more sober. "Why is this lady here?" "It's Miss Heidi." Repeating the command, Erika simply turned on the camera for Kinzu to see. "Why is she here?" Kinzu turned over and sat up. While walking towards the bathroom, he ordered, "Let her come in and wait for me in the living room." As he spoke, he had already run up to the second floor and hurried into his bedroom. There was no way. After the bumpy journey, his current image was no longer suitable for going out to meet people. After washing up in the bathroom and changing clothes, Kinzu smiled and walked down. "Ha, Heidi, you are so busy, how come you have time to come to my place?" Before he arrived, Kinzu's hearty laughter had already spread over, making Heidi, who was sitting on the sofa with a cup of coffee, look bright. "What? Someone is planning to run away, and you don't allow me to come and see him?" Heidi put the coffee on the coffee table with a smile, and stood up to greet him. Looking at Heidi walking towards him, Kinzu couldn't help but flash a look of surprise in his eyes. In the past, Heidi's dress has always been hot, either bright red hot pants or belly exposing vests. Although beautiful, she is overdressed and always has a sense of dust. Today, Heidi not only changed her dazzling hair color to black, but also that clothes she wore have undergone earth-shaking changes. Black one-step skirt, white lace shirt, fresh and refreshing, giving people the feeling of a professional strong woman. What are you doing? Pointing at the clothes, Kinzu looked at her in surprise. Don't mention it. I'm so annoyed. Helplessly tugging at her collar, not caring about the exposed white skin, Heidi said with a depressed look. I'm interning at Daddy's company recently, and I have to dress like this. Oh, you've started working too? Listening to Heidi's words, Kinzu seemed to have seen an alien, and smiled and teased. I remember that someone has always been a liberal. Why did he suddenly change his personality? It's because Daddy is not good enough. Sighing, Heidi sat on the sofa, not caring about her ladylike image at all, and complained. I told him a long time ago to find a little girl outside to give birth to a son to inherit his paralyzed business, but there has been no movement until now. I have to come to work and inherit his business. It's so annoying. ... Chapter 1000. The duck in the mouth flew away. You don't want so much money, are you stupid? Kinzu looked at Haley speechlessly, and he didn't know what to say. In order to get rid of the money, he actually encouraged his father to take a concubine. Oh my god, why didn't he encounter such a good thing? TSK, even if I don't inherit the family property, they can still starve me? Rolling a look at Kinzu, Haley stretched, half leaning lazily on a sofa, and said confidently. Then I don't have to work, and I don't have to worry about having no money. How comfortable this life is. Okay, your idea seems to be fine. Shrugging his shoulders, Kinzu had to admit that this girl's idea was really special. At first glance, it seems very unreliable and unpromising. It's really not good to be a useless person who waits and waits for death and is so confident. However, if you think about it carefully, you will find that this is the most correct choice. Because she is a girl, even if she works hard, in the end, once she gets married, won't everything belong to others? There's nothing wrong with me, okay? Haley, half leaning on the sofa, said with a smile. If I inherit the family property, and then I meet a bad man like you, won't you take everything away? Hey, let's not make personal attacks, okay? Spreading his hands, Kinzu said helplessly. How do I become the representative of bad men? You know whether you're bad or not? With a cold snort, Haley stood up from the sofa and walked around the villa twice. You too, you don't live in such a nice villa, you don't stay in the bustling Big Apple, and you have to run to Montana where there is no one. What's the mentality? This, Kinzu touched his nose and thought for a long time, maybe, this kind of behavior should be called seeking abuse. What else? After giving Kinzu a look that said you're smart, Haley seemed to suddenly remember something. By the way, Clean, are you going to take Heidi with you this time? Heidi? Hearing this familiar name, Kinzu instantly thought of the naughty blue macaw. He looked at Haley curiously, and asked with a smile. What? Are you willing to let it go? Of course I'm not willing to let it go. Shrugging, Haley said helplessly. But I can't bear to let it go. This guy is too naughty. He bullied Peter so much that he dared not leave the cage. If it goes on like this, Peter will definitely die at its hands. So naughty? Kinzu didn't quite believe it after listening to Haley's description. Although that girl was naughty before, she was still a gentle little lady by nature. How could you turn into a little witch in the blink of an eye? What else? Haley spread her hands and glared at Kinzu speechlessly. It's true that a pet is as useful as its owner. Hey, if you make personal attacks again, I won't be polite to you. Kinzu was a little unhappy after being provoked by this little girl several times. He looked at his palm and then at someone's perky little butt, with a smirk on his face. What do you want to do? Haley subconsciously stretched out her hands to protect her vital parts and glared at Kinzu with shame and anger. If you dare to mess around, I will bite you to death. Bite me. Great, come on. Seeing Haley like this, Kinzu inexplicably felt a strange excitement in his heart. He originally just wanted to scare her, but now he felt like he was riding a tiger and couldn't get off. No, Clean, you are not serious, are you? Moving her body to the side of the sofa, although Haley had a trace of fear on her face, her eyes revealed a long-lost excitement. Why not? Shrugging his shoulders, Kinzu moved his body step by step, slowly approaching Haley. No, Clean, you have a girlfriend. Haley, who could have stood up and fled the scene, felt that she suddenly became weak all over and didn't want to move at all. No, Haley, you're wrong, I don't have a girlfriend. Shaking his head, Kinzu said something that made Haley feel very puzzled when she saw Haley's surprise. They are all my wives, so I don't have a girlfriend, right? You were a big-headed ghost. Haley, who found that she was fooled, gave this guy a coquettish look and slid out from under his arm. HMPH, then go and play with your wives. I won't wait for you. Having said that, without waiting for Kinzu to react, Haley picked up her own runner and ran out. It seemed that there was something terrifying behind her, chasing him. Oh my god, the duck in my mouth just flew away. Kinzu stared at Haley's back in a daze until he heard the sound of a car engine outside. It turned out that the duck in my mouth really can fly away. Shaking his head with a wry smile, Kinzu tidied up the living room and hurried upstairs. Why? I was a little angry. Today, the women were not at home, so I had to take a cold shower. However, when he finished taking a cold shower and went downstairs, he found that Zumengyo and others had returned. Are you kidding me? Shaking his wet hair, Kinzu suddenly had the urge to cry for some reason. Hey, husband, why are you taking a bath in broad daylight? Zumengyo, who was packing up today's spoils downstairs, turned around and saw Kinzu who had just come downstairs, and said with a smile, "What's the matter, did you do something bad?" Bad things? What bad things can I do? Rolling his eyes at the girl, Kinzu suppressed his guilty conscience and complained unhappily. You all left one by one, and I was bored at home and could only sleep. This, who told you not to be in the room at the time? Zumengyo smiled embarrassedly, and was defeated by Kinzu and quickly changed the subject. Hey, husband, come and take a look, how about this dress? It's a new dress from Gucci. Dress? Kinzu walked over, looked at the black dress suit in the bag, and said with a bit of a smile, "Wife, how many opportunities do you think I will have to wear a dress after we get to the ranch?" Hee, don't worry about this. Zumengyo laughed twice and smiled mysteriously. You'll know when the time comes. There are some party invitations that you can't refuse. That's true. Kinzu nodded in agreement. Just like what he said before, Henry invited him to visit England. Could he refuse? Of course, he could refuse. But if he refused too many times, it meant that he didn't want to maintain this relationship anymore. Fin DS capture much as great as Pelaga has to L final. No se olvidem dull like bus gasms contenido exclusive YXO in medito. Se scrubata news to Patreon. Recurda, card alike, se scripsino donakin nos anima continue. Great as a todos nos vemos on Elpsmovdo.